one of the tailored tracks of the RETAP program. So give me 1 second to share my screen. So Sandra, do you mind if I share my screen really quickly? If you give me permission to share my screen, I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of the next steps and how we are going to apply this great knowledge that you are obtaining here and learning. And let's share my screen. Here we go. This is great. Can you all see my screen?
Yes. Wonderful.
This is wonderful. So I am Simona Rasek. I'm the RETAP Client Relation Manager. And I just want to remind everyone that you might be registered for the workshops at RETAP, but maybe you have not registered for the actual RETAP program. If you qualify to continue the work with us. And I want to walk you through this process. So you could take a picture or a screenshot of this slide just for you to make sure you have the registration for the different registration link for the program versus the workshop. Once you arrive on our landing page at the LA Chamber of Commerce, you will click on the Register tab and you start to answer the questions. The more questions you answer, the easiest for us to determine if you are in the 101 track or the 201 track. The 101 track is basically you are ready to export, but you have not exported yet. So if you've been in operation for 1 year, your company is registered with the state of California, your products or services are 51% made in USA, and you have a functional website so you can easily present your products and services to foreign buyers, then you will qualify for the 101 track. And this is where you're going to work with Maurice and access additional resources and have access to more mentorship, in addition to referring you to our partners in the region to continue the work on your global expansion strategy. Now, if you might qualify for the 201 track, which means that you are in operation for 1+ year, you are officially registered with the state of California. Again, your products and services are 51% US made. You are new to market, so you're not new to exports, but you are new to market, meaning that you have already exported to at least 1 to 3 countries, so you understand what it takes to complete an export transaction, and now you're ready to either expand your target market in your market share in a country, or you're looking to enter a new foreign country. That means you would qualify for the 201 track, and that's where you will be working with me moving forward. And we have additional services and additional programs for you, and I will show you in one moment. And additionally, if you are a export management company, if you want to offer trading services or you want to support other companies' export, because now you have so much knowledge about exports, you're an aspiring export management company or an existing export management companies, we also have a program for you to complete the NEST by CGBP training, which is really for professionals in this field. And I'm sure that Maurice and Sandra will give you the link to register for this program. It's a very comprehensive professional educational program for companies looking to become export management services, basically. So for companies in the 101, 201, and also in the NESBITE CGBP track, the first step that we'll take. So once we know that your interest and you qualify for one of these 3 tracks, you will be receiving a RETAP participation agreement via email. It comes from DocuSign. Our Peter Fu, our VP of Entrepreneurship and Workforce, is the person who will be sending this agreement to you. So if you think that you are part of 101 and 201, but you have not signed the participation agreement, that means you're actually not part of the program. So I'm going to give you on the last slide the emails to make sure you are connected with us. For both those companies who are, those attendees and companies who are part of the 101 and the 201 level, there's going to be an export readiness assessment for you to complete. We talked about that later. Once you email me, I can give you all this information easily via email, but we do need you to complete the export readiness assessment. If you have never exported before, but you are ready to export, please make sure that you email Maurice, our program manager. Make sure that you send him an email and make sure you ask Maurice to be included in the 101 track, where we're going to bring additional resources from our partners in the region. If you have already exported and have some experience, please make sure you email me. And yes, this is a Gmail, but it's a real email. I created this Gmail just for this program, so I don't miss your email. So jdtstrade@gmail.com is the email I'm using for this program. I need to know that you want to be enrolled in program 201, and I need to start working with you. That means that the next step, once I understand your qualification, I'm going to make sure that you are connected with our research expert, international marketing research expert, Dr. Sarita Jackson. She is going to work with you to put together this comprehensive global market research report to look at where in the world there is the highest demand for your products or services, and to bring all the data analysis that is needed for you to make the right decision when you choose the top markets of entry. So if you're part of 201, again, meaning you have already exported before and you want to expand, please make sure you email me so I can take you to the next step, which is a customized market research with Dr. Sarita Jackson. Additionally, for both 101 and 201, we have this really wonderful support system here in Los Angeles, in the region, in our region. We have SBA, Axim. You've heard from many of them. That is a lot of resources, and our job is to help you navigate, to understand which of these additional resources will be a great support for you given the export the phase of the export development you are currently in. And then the great, wonderful support that and additional services that we offer is working with the U.S. Commercial Service Export Assistance Centers in our region. Mm-hmm. We have here, we have Richard Swanson, who is the director of the Irvine Center, who is assigned to our program. They have many different services they offer. However, in order for you to qualify for these services and to have a meeting with an international trade specialist from the U.S. Commercial Service, I do need to have a meeting with you. We do need to complete the questionnaire and understand from Dr. Sarita Jackson which markets are the best market for you. The program, the RETAP programs of the Los Angeles Chamber will cover the fees of the U.S. Commercial Service programs. Of course, that is subject to availability and eligibility determined by the U.S. commercial specialists we'll be working with. But we do have a company right now who is doing an international market check in a foreign market, a brand new market, and we cover the fees and we're moving forward. So this is the kind of work we will be doing together. I just want to make sure that you will be emailing me. Thank you all. That's all I had to say today. And again, here's my email, jdtstrade@gmail.com. If you have not had a meeting with me today, please send me an email and I will send you my calendar link to schedule a meeting. I will stop talking now. Thank you so much. You still have a few more workshops ahead, and I think it's very exciting that now we're moving into applying a lot of the things that you are learning. So enjoy the program today, and thank you, Sandra, for giving me this time to reconnect with our attendees.
Thank you so much, Simona.
Okay, let's get ready for the the actual topics today. We're covering the broad topic, legal do's and don'ts for exporters. And we have 5 speakers to crowd into 3.5 hours. The first one, Dr. Keith Clement, will cover how to protect against cybersecurity threats. Then Bruce Leeds will cover how to comply with U.S. export regulations. After the break, I will talk about how to comply with the foreign import regulations, and followed by how to protect your intellectual property abroad. And finally, how to deal with corruption and demands for bribes, and how to resolve commercial disputes. So we've assembled experts in each of these areas, and we're going to start with Dr. Keith Clement on how to protect against cybersecurity threats. Dr. Clement is a real expert in the field of cybersecurity. He's a professor of criminology at California State University, Fresno, and chairs the Workforce Development Education Subcommittee of the California Cybersecurity Task Force. He also chairs a number of others, but rather than go over his biography, I'd rather give him more time to make his presentation. So Keith, go ahead with this first topic.
Fantastic, Maurice. Sandra, deeply appreciate all of the kind advice, Simona, that you gave about how to be involved with the RETAP and the programs that we're talking about. I can only imagine that I was selected to speak first, not because of, a dynamic speaking style that I have in the classroom, but rather because it is very clear that cybersecurity and artificial intelligence are having a tremendous impact on everything that we do here. And I would like to think of it as kind of a common theme or a common element that really ties together many of the workshop presentations that you're going to see today. I think that that's a way that we can draw a lot of things together, like intellectual property, corruption, just crime, right? Just call it for what it is. This is a great way to link a lot of these topics together. I believe Maurice already gave a brief outline, and I do believe that these slides will be made available to participants. So this is what I do, but I'm a busy guy, and we don't have time to talk about all that kind of stuff. But just so that you know, I would be considered a state and national expert in cybersecurity and AI, so that we're not wasting anybody's time. This is the view of things at the highest levels. For our purposes. I think that the scope of cybersecurity cannot be over exaggerated or over described. I know that a lot of people might consider it a passing phase or a buzzword, or just an overused, tired, old term. And actually, nothing could really be further from the truth in this area. The problem of cybersecurity plagues many areas and many sectors that industry and economic sectors that our businesses are involved with. So if you're in healthcare or transportation or manufacturing or whatever, it just doesn't matter. If you have power, if you use power at your place of work, you have a cybersecurity problem, all right? So you should never think of yourself as being immune, and we'll talk about continuous vulnerability in a second. Folks, we're really talking about millions of 750 million threats a day. Now a threat is obviously a lot different than an attack or a breach, or what I'm saying? That these threats are kind of the big picture, and then more and more of them kind of get funneled out. And then we actually have a very core of the funnel of very potentially sophisticated, very dangerous cyber attacks. And I'll tell you, the average tangible loss, the money loss is about $9.4 million. So just think of your company and your bottom line, and what would a sudden $9.4 million loss do to your business? And if the answer is put it out of business, you would join about 60% of companies that would be at risk of never reopening after a comprehensive, devastating cyber attack. And we'll talk about some of that kind of stuff in just a second. Cyber attacks occur every 39 seconds. We are talking about thousands of attacks on a daily basis. Now those 750 million, those are just threats. These 2,300, these are actual problems, right? So you can see this funnel of causality, a few thousand new attacks a day. Folks, this year, 2024, 2025 timeframe, cybercrime cost Americans and the global economy $10.5 trillion. And actually, cybercrime itself is currently the third largest economy in the world after the US and China. So so that's how big of a situation we're talking about here. One of the issues that we as employers often have as industry and as businesses is that we often have a very difficult time in actually finding cybersecurity professionals, right? To man the front lines and take care of these cyber attacks and these cyber threats. So I think that there's like 4 million jobs available worldwide, about 500,000 jobs in the US, about 40 or 50,000 jobs available in California, if you really wanted to break it down. There's probably 17,000 cyber jobs available in the greater Los Angeles area, if you really wanted to break it down to, very, very granular level. I want to just say for the record that AI is fueling a lot of these problems, okay? AI is both transformative and it is disruptive. I mean, it's transformative and it's changing our lives and doing all these great things for us. But on the other hand, it's also very disruptive, and disruption can be measured in many different ways, like, for example, disruption or some of these kinds of issues. What's critical for us to know these days is that AI serves both the attacker, or the so-called red team, in developing more sophisticated attacks, as well as it is also impactful of the blue team operations, right? So-called defensive measures that are super important for what we're talking about, okay? So I would be remiss if I did not go into the idea that AI is fueling deep fakes and other types of cyber shenanigans, I guess that we could call them. It is what it is. So the scope is here. The impact is great. Folks that are not looking at the role of AI in cybersecurity at their workplace or their business, their organization, that's not the stance that you want to be taking here. But we also want to understand the motivations, right? I mean, we have obvious crime and an obvious problem here. The question is, what drives people to engage in cyber shenanigans and cyber attacks? And we break it down into 6, and these are not exactly mutually exclusive, right? That there's a lot of blending over between some of these. Like, for example, you can see financial gain, which is the obvious one. I mean, crime pays, cyber crime pays. I mean, there's no surprise why people are engaged in the financial based motivation of cybercrime. But, like, for example, financial gain could easily have ties to number 3, insider threats, could easily have ties to political actors, state level actors, and obviously corporate espionage, right? I mean, if I'm going to steal from a company as maybe an insider, I'm obviously doing it for financial gain, unless I'm doing it for like recognition and achievement. And I suspect that many of these motivations, maybe all of the above, probably qualify. It's really important to understand motivations, because with the understanding of the motivations, you can then begin to devise strategies and plans about how you would defeat or overcome these situations. But I would just run through them quickly: financial gain, recognition and achievement. A lot of hackers love to post their exploits online in the dark web or darker web, and so they gain prestige and recognition for their status and their savviness, right? Their boldness. I mean, these are definitely factors in the hacker community. They may operate on some levels anonymously, but on other levels, they do want to be known for their talents. Third, insider threats, and speaking to a chamber or business community, I really think that insider threats really have to factor in. That is that the people in your organizations that already have the keys to your kingdom. Yeah, okay. Well, what happens when they're no longer a trusted, valued employee, right? And they still have that access. They could easily place back doors, right? They have other alternative identities with high levels of access. I mean, you just never know. Political motivation or hacktivism, state actors. There are a number of state actors that are involved in cyber crimes, and I would put probably North Korea at the top of that list, right? And including what's going on right now with their North Korean IT workers working at trusted companies and government organizations purely remotely, and they are only there. They're not there exactly for the money. I'm sure that's probably nice too. They're there to gain as much access and data and information, and then they're gone, right? I mean, so state actors and corporate espionage, and both of these will really tie into intellectual property and intellectual property protection for the obvious reasons that we do have state and corporate actors that are heavily infringing on IP. And AI has additional intellectual property concerns, but that's beyond my scope. So I really don't want to bore folks with an awful lot of details because I just want to say that this is complicated stuff, right? It's not like you can just spend 10 or 15 minutes scanning through cybersecurity stuff and you're an expert and you know all you need to know. And whatever capacity we're talking about, personally or the CEO of a company, it just doesn't matter. This is some complicated stuff. And I really wanted to break this. I wanted to break this slide down as easy as possible so that I apologize if you feel your intelligence insulted by describing each of these in a sentence or something. But I really wanted to just break it out as simply as possible so that you can understand the ways that we can devise to prevent these crimes from happening to us in the future. The first is malware, and I'm going to discuss this in a lot of detail in a second. All I want to say is this: everything you click on, okay, everything you click on has the opportunity to inject malware or some form of software onto your device. It could obviously, and most of the time, it is non-threatening, non-malicious, like for example, a cookie, right? So when you visit a site, it drops a cookie. The next time you go to the site, it recognizes you, right? It knows you're a regular there and that kind of thing. Sometimes, though, when you click on a malicious link, and folks, if you can click on it, it can be a malicious link, right? I'm just telling you straight up. If it is clickable, then it is potentially dangerous. That's why you got to be really careful about what you click. Nothing wrong with looking at it, right? You're looking at the link, you're looking at the site, if you're looking at it, good. Only looking at it, okay. You start clicking on stuff, you start to possibly download viruses and worms and other malicious code onto your machine or your network, and it can begin to damage and steal data. Okay. Most of this stuff is non-malicious, right? A cookie's a cookie, but you never know. This is one of the reasons why a lot of people are deeply concerned about clicking on those QR codes, the ones that I'm talking about. We saw some earlier today. QR codes. I tell you, personally, I do not click on a QR code unless it's my QR code that I physically created myself. Okay. So if I was at a business meeting and somebody gave me a business card to scan for a QR code, a very powerful individual, may I add, I actually had to tell them I do not do that. So, I'm now I had to tell a vice president or thereabouts of a major US corporation that I am unable to scan that card of yours. I apologize. Right? That's what I'm talking about. QR codes. You never know where it's going to go unless you made it yourself. And I hate to be that guy. But that I'm trying to help you protect yourself, and QR codes are something you need to watch out for, like a hawk. That's the hawk thing. Don't know what I'm doing. Second, ransomware. This list of these items is not haphazard or random. Okay. Number 1 and number 2 here are there for a reason. Number 1, malware, that's the big one. Number 2, ransomware is probably the one that many of you are probably going to be more concerned about. Okay. Why? Because our businesses rely on information systems and accuracy and precision and confidentiality and accessibility. Okay. And when ransomware hits, they encrypt your files and you pay for the key to get it back. Now, this is a huge deal for businesses. This is a huge deal for small and medium-sized businesses as well, because if you do not have like a good backup strategy, or if you don't have a lot going for you in this matter, and all of your business critical files are encrypted, that's bad, right? That's trouble right there. And the official government line is that you don't pay the ransomware. Okay. Because you don't know if you're going to get your information back. And they do tend to provide your information back to you, but not always. The other idea many times is that this idea of like routine reinfection, right? So, I mean, they leave some back doors, they unencrypt or give you the key to your data. You're back in business. Well, they still have access to your stuff. And it might not all be about the money, right? I mean, we often assume it to be a lot about the money. Maybe they're just looking to see what you and your business are doing. And right, what are the emails of your CEOs and your C-suite? What are y'all talking about? What's engineering working on right now, right? What's their new patent in progress? These are the exact kinds of things that could be exfiltrated. I saw a report that the average dwell time in a system, the amount of time that a malicious actor is inside of your system doing whatever they're doing, right? Who knows what they're doing? Maybe they're just looking. Maybe they're changing your data. Maybe they're deleting stuff. Who knows, right? That's the fun of hacking. That it really becomes a problem getting all of this stuff back. And ransomware is bad, and it is actually so profitable. It is so profitable that we now see the rise of what we call ransomware gangs, where it's ransomware as a service, and they're pretty direct about it, and an example of how it has become. Third on the list is phishing attacks related to spear phishing attacks. And I don't, I know that you know about this kind of stuff. I mean, we hear about this all the time. I saw that about 21% of organizational members, like of your businesses, 21% of folks respond to phishing attacks. Even if there is a campaign at the employer, right? You have like a campaign about anti-phishing and beware of weird looking emails, and then they send out a weird looking email. 21% of people still click on that one. When the employees are very well trained, I've seen numbers about 7%. So 7% of folks are clicking on those obviously malicious emails, right? I just won $30 million from some country across the world. All I got to do is give them a bank number and my PIN number, and I'm a rich guy. That kind of stuff. Fishing and spearfishing. The difference between these two is that spearfishing is extraordinarily targeted and probably something that this community really needs to know about. Okay, spearfishing, where they're actually going after you or your business in that capacity, in a very select, very specific manner. Dear so and so, I came by your name and business contact from somebody you don't know. And then there's this really suspicious looking email that says, I need for you to do this now. I mean, your competitors are looking at this offer too. I need to hear from you today, right? I mean, that kind of language. Very targeted, though. It's to you, or to maybe it's to your vice presidents. I mean, it's not a general phishing attack. I also want to mention, because of the business community ties that you have with third party and vendors in many of your capacities, that a supply chain attack is of concern. That is that they don't go after you or your business, but they go after the people that serve you in your business. And so this is one of the ways that a lot of the defense and a lot of the military kinds of breaches and exploits have come from. Well, at least in the last few years, I think they really did a great job of cutting that back. But they attacked federal networks through supply chain vendor stuff. Somebody, a small little plumbing company, is insecure, right? And we do business with your facilities, and that's how they sneak right on in, right? I mean, it's dangerous stuff. Also, because of this, I want to bring up the idea of credential theft and business email compromise. Credential theft is that they steal credentials and gain access to a variety of networks that they wouldn't otherwise belong to. Business email compromise, for example, is when all of your employees get an email from you that is, they're impersonating you, and they're trying to get your employees or your customers or whoever to do things that probably isn't in their best interest necessarily, right? Maybe a business email that says, "Hey, we just set up a new paid subscription service for anything that we do. Our first payment is $100, and we see that you haven't paid your $100 yet, so we're going to cut off your access tomorrow, or on the 1st, or whatever it is." And what do people do? They follow the link, they pay the $100, and then their nightmares can begin. I just want to add that Gen AI is known to both add risks to this area, and also what we call adversarial capabilities. I have heard from good authority that an AI-based hacker needs about 23 seconds of video, your gait, how, your the way you talk, right? A hacker or an AI would have plenty of information on me from this presentation to do a very credible deep fake. And if I really wanted to blow your mind, I would say that this is actually AI generated, and I'm in another room, or I'm on the beach doing something else, and this is an AI talking. And folks, I have been at that meeting, and I tell you, they are the amount of shock to find out that you just got lectured or discussed or presented by for the last 20 minutes by an AI avatar. That would be a day-changing event. I've seen some very credible ones. Your boss, right? From a mayor, the CEO, the CFO, folks. The only reason why AI deepfakes is not a bigger concern is that the cost to launch one of those kinds of attacks, it takes a lot of resources, a lot of money. As the cost of deepfakes goes down, you will begin to see the rise of deepfakes and phishing and other things. Just imagine getting a call from your mom or a family member that is just a phone call or a FaceTime call where you are literally looking at whoever in your life, and it could be and it's not them, and they're talking, their mannerisms, the words they use, All right, you get the point. So general commons protections versus cyber threats. So I'm going to run through these really, really quickly. The first thing is that business critical systems and data must be treated as such. Okay. So just think of it like this. If it is critical to your business or your operation, you must treat it and protect it in that fashion. Okay. You are not putting your trusted business systems into danger. And if bad things happen to your business critical systems and data, I don't know what's going to work out for you. Second, okay, proactive cyber policies. You want to get on top of this. You want to be in front of this. You want to be ahead of this. You want to be preventative of this. You do not want to wait around until something bad happens and then get on the program. There's a cartoon that I love, and it's like before the breach, and the security team is getting like nickels and dimes from management. And then after the security breach, the IT teams are getting crisp $100 bills, and it's a big stack. Folks, don't play with the risk. The costs far outweigh whatever minimal cost savings that you are talking about. All right. An ounce of prevention, a pound of cure. How about an ounce of prevention and not go out of business as a result of cybersecurity issues? Don't wait around. Don't be reactive. You need to be in front of this. The reason why there's really two thoughts in this next bullet point: sophistication versus unsophistication. There are sophisticated attacks and unsophisticated attacks. So like if you get a really goofy looking email that you just won $30 million, blah, 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 that's pretty unsophisticated. And most of us know better now, right? But they get really sophisticated. Hey, you just won that they know that you're a bicycle enthusiast. Hey, you just won a $5,000 bike for your, for being an avid bicyclist. Please click here to claim your prize. Boom, they got you right there. But the second component of this, not sophistication and unsophistication, is this idea of continuous vulnerability, right? That just because you're safe today, right? Just because your system is updated, just because your security is top of the line today, that has no bearing on what your security situation may be tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? That tomorrow is a different day. And there may be a new threat. There may be a new email that you haven't seen. There may be a new attack that you're unaware of. So just because you're safe right now does not mean you're safe tomorrow, which means that we need continuous vigilance. Well, right? Continuous vulnerability requires continuous vigilance. You can't say on a Friday afternoon, my systems and data are totally safe and I'm taking the weekend off, because you show up on Monday and you're out of business, right? Because you've just been, et cetera. Why? Well, why are you out of business? When calculating potential cyber losses, the dollar costs, about $9.5 million in average cyber losses. Okay. Do not ever forget the intangible damage caused to a reputation as the result of a public breach or attack or data loss or whatever. You will lose customers. You will lose business. Folks are not very forgiving, particularly when it is their very sensitive financial, health, or educational data that has been coughed up. And they, as a consumer, they will hold it against you. As a customer, they will hold it against you. And reputation losses, intangible losses, sometimes impossible to calculate the true damage to your firm or your brand as a result of these kinds of things. Careful on what you click on, right? Spoke about that before, a continuous theme. Social engineering is all about manipulation, deception, and making you feel something. And then you act as a result of that feeling, and a good feeling, right? I mean, positive feeling. Social engineering is all about the study of how to get people to click on things they should not be clicking on. And that's why they use the element of time, right? Now, urgent, please respond immediately, that kind of stuff. The reason why they use that kind of language is it puts this false sense of pressure and stress on people to make decisions that they would not otherwise make if they really thought it all through. I mean, $30 million, someone a lottery from where? I've never heard of them before. I have no idea what this is all about. Hey, well, let me click on it and find out what this is about. I mean, bingo, they just got you, etc. Cybersecurity insurance. I don't want to go into it because that's probably a discussion all by itself. But cybersecurity insurance, if you have assets and things to protect, cyber insurance might be for you, with the understanding that getting a policy underwritten or getting a paycheck or getting a check for a loss may be difficult if you do not follow the terms of your cybersecurity insurance policy, right? Which includes things like regular patching and all these other MFA requirements and all these other kinds of things. If you are unable to provide that evidence upon loss, there's a good chance that cyber insurance policy will not pay out. And that's even worse of a outcome for many of us. AI is playing a greater role in cyber attacks and defenses. Key theme, just wanted to throw it back in there again. I guess they needed another bullet point for this. AI is getting better every day. Today's AI is smarter than yesterday's AI. Tomorrow's AI is going to be smarter than today's. It's small and it's incremental, but a lot of small incremental growth sustained over time that becomes big growth. So just put that onto your agenda. If you wanted specific protections against cybersecurity attacks and threats, I would just emphasize the idea of proactive and multi-layered approach, right? I mean, this is a defense. The best defense is on multiple levels in different areas. Just think of it as, do you just want one single fence? Or would you like to have a variety of different fences, right? Digital fences, obviously. Do you want some of them electronic? You want some of them physical, right? A fence. Some of them might be sensitive motion sensing stuff, right? Proactive, multi-layered. One of the first things is password and multi-factor authentication. I don't want to be just another guide to tell you the importance of changing your password, but I mean, I would be remiss if I did not say, if you use the same password for all of your accounts, and I find what that master password is for all of your accounts, I need one password of yours, and I am all in on your systems. If that sounds like a good idea to you, then just use the same password for everything. If that sounds like a horrible idea for you, you really need to do some variation with your passwords. And I'll be honest, with the high computing era coming up in the near future, quantum computing, the password is going to be like 125 characters before too long, right? As encryption and codes get easily cracked. You might want to think of a password manager or a password vault where all of your passwords and all of your accounts reside in one place, and you go through that process. Third is regular employee training. I want to emphasize every employee, okay? From the top to the bottom, every single person in your organization needs regular employee training on cybersecurity awareness and preparedness. Every one of them. So I hate it when I hear from executive level folks saying, oh yeah, all my employees have this training that we mandate on them. They say, well, what about you? Like, well, we don't do that. I'm like, right then, that's a terrible idea. Data encryption, vulnerability assessment, pen testing. Thank you. Internet of Things, remote update and patch software regularly. That's goes right there. The value of firewall, endpoint protection, and lastly, this idea of continuous monitoring. You have continuous vulnerability. You need continuous monitoring. I am near the end of my presentation, so I will just put out my contact information. And Sandra and Maurice, I don't know if you want any questions. I don't know if what would you like?
Were there any questions in the chat?
Yes. We have a couple of questions.
Oh, from Faisal, I would not be able to do any of that kind of stuff. I consider myself vendor neutral, and I would not have a comment to. I see Sani's comment about bake heisted, aided by AI. Oh, just we're going to be seeing more and more of this. I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm an easy guy to get a hold of. So I see some of these things right there. I do see Queen Nina with her hand up or a high five.
Yes. I just wanted to make a really quick comment on what you were saying. The other day, I got a text message from the Bay Area fast track to pay a toll fee. And here in Los Angeles, I did get into the toll lane, so I thought that it was them, and I was about to pay the $3.99, and then I was like, I don't know if this is safe. Then I went to Metro website so I could pay the fee, and it clearly says there, do not pay if you get a text about, because that's fraud. So yeah, even things like that, I almost got duped. So you're right.
Queen Nina, let me tell you the number of people I have known that have personally fallen for that one, and I don't think that for them it was the $3.99 one. I think that it was a little bit more than that. So
Wow.
and it is so you fall for it once, and then you see it again, and you know to not go there. So that's an example of what you do in training. Is it say, hey, let's talk about this total fast track scam that's going on all across wherever. They just mass email folks, and coming from LA, or I live in Fresno. If I saw something from like an LA fast track or whatever, I'd be like, I know that's not the case. Me and my car don't drive in LA, but it can be very. That's an example of a very sophisticated or a semi-sophisticated attack, but the social engineering value is key because it is easy to manipulate and deceive people. And if you lived in the Bay Area, I could see people just they must have caught me the last time I was.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the info.
No, of course. Osiris, I see that you have a hand up.
Yes, I do. This is Osiris speaking. Good morning. Thank you for being here, Keith. Wanted to majorly just show you my face because of your chair position, and I think that's awesome. But I also had a question. I'm a yoga therapist, and I'm learning how to export globally, like things like courses, but also my merch. I'm curious if you've seen anything in the wellness field around cyber attacks, because I can't quite imagine it, but I'm sure it exists. Is it duplication of personality, identity, that like what could be happening there?
Well, in an area with lots of new and startup businesses that many folks may not have heard, they could actually probably just set up a fake sham corporation and have all this cool, great merchandise that they sell for ridiculously low prices that you just can't believe that thing is $2, right? And you click on it and then you're done. I mean, so I think that as a small business that you would have an awful lot to do for protection of name and brand. You would want to make sure, like maybe I would just clone your website and then I would just change the contact information to, my nefarious criminal activity. And so people think that they're reaching out to you, but they're actually reaching out to a cyber hacker who's, hey, free shipping, 30-day, all these crazy terms and all of these things that are just too good to be true. And they are too good to be true. And, obviously the person gets stuck.
So you're saying put like a fake firewall in for the hackers so the hackers meet a hack?
Well, I mean, if you wanted a honeypot, there are a variety of strategies that you could do. That would be like honeypotting it so that you made it too good of a target for hackers to not try to infiltrate and deal with. But we are definitely now talking about where you'd want to talk to some kind of a cyber analyst or some kind of a cybersecurity firm or others to address specific detailed questions that affect our business operations.
Copy. Thank you.
Maurice, I see that 9:51. I apologize for being 1 minute over. I surrender my time to the body.
No, that's fine. That was an eye-opening presentation. Thank you very much. Just in general about questions. sometimes it's hard to formulate a question during a presentation. At our last session on May 7th, the 8th workshop is open-ended. So any of you that have questions about anything we've discussed in any of the workshops, formulate them and send it to Sandra, Kim, and myself. So we have all those questions lined up to deal with in the 8th workshop. So let's move on to the next presentation from Bruce Leeds on U.S. export regulations. Bruce is an attorney who I've known for many years, who specializes in among other things, U.S. export controls, which is what we're talking about today. And so I want to give him as much time as possible to deal with that subject. Are you there, Bruce?
I'm here. You hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, good. And just bring up my presentation. And it looks like you're almost all alone in that room there.
You want us to pull it up?
I thought I sent it in.
Yeah, we have it. We have it. We'll get it for you.
Okay, good. This is a matter of background here. I started my career with the U.S. Customs, and then I worked in export and import compliance positions at Hughes Aircraft and Boeing Company. I went to law school at night, courtesy of the GI Bill, and got my pass to the state bar. And I'm now working at Brownwell Law Group. There we go. There's my full bio and everything up there, and Photoshop picture. So let's go on to the next page here. Okay, this is all about export controls. And question is, why should you care about this? Unfortunately, I've lived through a lot of this stuff, but if a product requires an export license or an export approval or an exemption to be shipped out of the United States, and you don't have it, the transaction stops right there. Or maybe you've negotiated what looks to be a great contract with a foreign customer, and you find out that customer is somebody you can't do business with because they're on a blacklist. Or maybe you need an export license to ship to that customer, and that license is going to take 2 or 3 months to obtain. All these things can stand in the way of getting business done and can ruin your business. Hey, there's some bad things that can happen. Detention or seizure of shipment. Customs is given tremendous authority at the ports of entry and exit, which include border ports and seaports and airports. They have the authority to stop a shipment and detain it if they feel that it may not be legally exported. And they can detain it for up to 30 days and ask you a bunch of embarrassing questions, ask for information about the product, all to determine whether or not maybe that shipment requires an export license and you didn't declare it. And if that is the case, the shipment requires an export license and you didn't have one or didn't declare it, they have the authority to actually seize, which means take possession of your shipment. One case I handled last few years was a gentleman in Orange County. He developed a flight simulator software program. Very bright guy. Developed flight simulator software and was ready to export it off to Europe for a demonstration with all the equipment that goes with it, like computers and monitors and whatnot. And Customs stopped the shipment and said, "Where's your license?" And this guy is new to exporting. He says, didn't know it took a license. Well, 3 years later, the shipment was ultimately released. By that time, of course, his business was killed. He actually went out of business, and he was originally from Europe. He moved back to Europe. It was a very unfortunate thing. That's what can happen. And different government agencies that control export control exports can also issue penalties. They can also investigate companies. So tremendous tools out there to make sure that people who are exporting do it correctly. And there are a whole bunch of US government blacklists. A couple of the major ones out there is what's called the Table of Denial Orders. And that is both individuals and companies, both domestic and foreign, that cannot export, and you can't export to them. So part of being a good compliant exporter is screening the parties you're shipping to make sure they're not on one of these blacklists, because it's illegal to do business with somebody that's on the Table of Denial Orders, for example. And you can buy screening software. There's several companies are be happy to sell you the software. There's also, you can go to bis.doc.gov. That's Bureau of Industry and Security. I'll tell you about more about them in a moment. Bureau of Industry and Security, Department of Commerce.gov, bis.doc.gov. And you go to the main page there, and there's a screening tool that's free. And you can go and screen parties to a transaction to make sure that none of them are on any of these blacklists. Another major one that's been growing and growing by leaps and bounds for the last few years is called the Entity List. And those are companies throughout the world, majority of them are in China, that we believe, the government believes, are either engaged in building the military in those countries or engaged in illegal activities. And there are several thousand companies on what's called the Entity List. And if you want to do business with one of those entities, you have to have an export license with a presumption of denial. So even if you want to ship toys to one of those companies, because they're on that list, you have to have an export license. If you apply for a license, it's likely going to be denied. So just to make you aware, all those bad things could happen, shipping to somebody on one of those lists, or that's a punishment that can be meted out to US companies that engage in illegal exports, is they can wind up on one of these blacklists, which means they cannot export. And they can be on this list for a year or 2 years or 3 years, during which time they're prohibited from exporting. Okay, now let's look at the positive side. If you know the export rules, if you know about what takes a license and what doesn't, go back to the page I was on. Okay, if you know all those rules and are compliant, that's a business advantage, because if you know the rules and your competition doesn't know those rules, you've got a leg up on your competition. And the government, by the way, encourages companies to inform on other companies that are not compliant. But if you have a license or exemption and you're able to export, that means you can ship on schedule, you can do business and be successful. Now let's go to the next page. Okay, there are something like 20 different government agencies that to one degree or another get involved with export controls. And here's some of the major ones. One of them I just mentioned a few minutes ago, Bureau of Industry and Security, Department of Commerce. That's the primary government agency that gets involved with export controls. They have an office, by the way, in Orange County that can help you. And they regulate exports of commercial products like computers and encryption software and that kind of stuff. They also regulate exports of what are called dual-use commodities. A dual-use commodity is a product that can be used for a military application, and the very same product can be used for a commercial application. Let's say a computer. The Department of Defense can use lots of computers. And as long as they don't have some kind of proprietary software on them that adapts into a military use, that's a typical dual-use product. It can be used for commercial applications and for military applications. And what's happened over the last few years is what's called export control reform. And many defense articles are now licensed actually by the Bureau of Industry and Security at the Department of Commerce. If you're going to export let's say, structural components that go into an F-18 or F-16 fighter. Many of those are now regulated by Department of Commerce as though they were commercial, even though they're certainly military. But the government has decontrolled a lot of military products. Okay, speaking of military products, the main government agency there to deal with is called the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls. I understand this is the only government agency that calls itself a directorate. That kind of gives you a flavor for what they're like. They take their job very seriously. They can be friendly, they can be helpful, but they also take their job extremely, uh, extremely seriously. They license exports of defense articles and technical data. So, going to export components that go into a military aircraft or an armored vehicle or something. That's the primary agency you have to deal with. If you want to hire a foreign person come and work for you, let's say a smart engineer, and you want to hire her and have her work in your facility, and she is a foreign person, she doesn't have a green card, you may have to actually obtain an export license, hire that person to come and work for you, because that's deemed an export, even though they're working in your facility in the United States. Okay. And the Director of Defense Trade Controls, or DDTC as we call them, they actually issue export licenses for defense articles and technology, technical data. They also have what are called license agreements, which can last up to 10 years. So if you want to have a product manufactured by a foreign company, a defense article manufactured by a foreign party, that may require what's called a license agreement, which is like a contract between you and the foreign party, and that contract is approved by the Director of Defense Trade Controls. And there's also the Office of Foreign Asset Controls. They manage U.S. embargoes. And some of the major embargoes you can think of is like Cuba and North Korea and Iran. But actually, there are embargoes on something like 20 different countries. And so you may need to double check to make sure you're not shipping a product to a embargoed destination. For example, Venezuela, they've been in the news recently. They're subject to U.S. embargoes because of the president of Venezuela as somebody who is not, his accusation is he was not democratically elected, that he's pretty much taken over. So anything associated with the president of Venezuela is subject to embargoes. So if you're exporting to Venezuela, you better go check the Office of Foreign Assets Controls, OFAC.gov and OFAC.treasury.gov, and make sure that whoever you're dealing with business with in Venezuela is not an embargoed party. It's also the Bureau of Census. Every time you export something, you have to file an export declaration. That's managed by the Bureau of Census. They keep track of our trade balances. So if you hear on the news that the U.S. has a trade deficit with another country, how do we know that? Every time something clears customs, the information regarding that import shipment is sent to Bureau of Census. And every time you export something, the information about that export shipment is sent to the Bureau of Census. They add up those numbers, and that's how we know what our export trade balance is. And then U.S. Customs and Border Protection, they're the cops, the enforcement agency, as already mentioned before, given huge authority to regulate exports and regulate imports to make sure that they're legal and being carried out properly. And so you may have an export, go out and get an export license, but if you don't know how to use it properly, you can have your shipment seized. And I think we're going to touch on that in a moment. In fact, let's go to the next page. Okay, got a transaction here. Got a good old Acme Corporation. They want to export electronic gizmos to a potential customer in Lower Solovia. Okay, so look like fictitious names. They are. Okay, the gizmos can be used for both commercial and military applications. Acme also wants to provide technical data and training to the customer on how to use and maintain the gizmos. Sounds like a good export transaction. What will Acme need to do to satisfy U.S. export controls? So next page, please. First, they're doing business with a company in Lower Slovenia. Is that country subject to U.S. embargoes and sanctions? So now you're going to have to go check with the OFAC, Office of Foreign Assets Control, ofac.treasury.gov, to make sure that that country and parties in that country are not subject to embargoes or sanctions. Next thing is, are the gizmos subject to export controls? Well, we said on the previous page, the gizmos can be used for both military and commercial applications. So you got an issue there. You may need to get an export license. What agency do you apply to get an export license? If the gizmos are truly dual use, the identical item could be used for both the military and a commercial application, they apply to the Department of Commerce. If they're made or modified for a military application, it's beginning to look like you have to apply to the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, DDTC. That's part of the State Department, by the way. Their full email or web addresses as pmddtc.state.gov. Okay. Next, the U.S. Export ACMEs is going to provide technical data and training to the customer in Lower Slovenia. Is that technical data and training subject to export controls? And I don't know how the EX got in there. Excuse me, that's a typo, so ignore that. Okay, because it very well could be. Technical data is subject to export controls if it relates to a controlled product. And training on how to use, operate, maintain, repair a licensed product can also be subject to an export license application. So if got an issue there, is all that subject to export controls? If so, who do you apply to? Okay, so Acme is going to need to apply for all the required licenses. And to get an export license, it may take a month to get a license. It may take 3 months to get a license. I've seen situations where it takes 6 months to get an export license. And actually obtaining all the information you need to apply for an export license may also take some time to round up all the information needed to apply for a license. Okay, so need plenty of advanced planning to get an export license, round up the information to apply for the license, and then get the approval. It'll all take time, plan ahead. Okay, now, once Acme's got the appropriate export licenses, they're going to have to get with their export freight forwarder to make sure the forwarder follows the correct procedures for exports. So the forwarder's got to file an export declaration on behalf of Acme, and they have to file it in a specific manner. It has to contain specific information, and it may require a little bit more advanced planning on when they file the export declaration. The forwarder and Acme are going to have to keep records of that export and have to keep the records for 5 years. So altogether, piece of cake. Okay, next page. Okay, I'd say in the world of things out there, most things are not subject to export controls. Maybe you're exporting video games. You're exporting sports equipment. Well, that stuff typically is not going to be subject to export controls unless it's going to a sanctioned destination or a sanctioned party. Okay. And defense articles and technical data, though, if it relates to a military product or military technology, that may require an export license or what's called an agreement. I mentioned that before, from the Director of Defense Trade Controls. So these are different types of approvals. Non-defense or dual use articles may require a license of Bureau of Industry and Security. Each one of these agencies has their own mechanism for applying for a license. With the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, they share an export licensing system with the Department of Defense. and DECCS, Defense Export Controls. I'm trying to remember what the letters stand for. But you have to sign up if you want to get a license from the Director of Defense Trade Controls. First of all, you have to register with them and pay an annual fee, which I believe is now $3,000 minimum. You have to register and pay an annual fee. Then you have to sign up for what's called the DECCS system. That's the export licensing system they share with the Department of Defense. And now you can apply for a license. Okay. And what if you're going to export a commercial or dual use item that requires a license from the Bureau of Industry and Security, bis.doc.gov? They have their own licensing system. It's called SNAP-R. And so if you want to apply for a license, they don't accept, neither of these agencies will accept hard copy license applications. Instead, you have to apply for license online, and the Bureau of Industry and Security, Department of Commerce, they have their own system called SNAP-R. Fortunately, it's free, so there's no annual fee that you have to pay or anything like that, but you have to sign up for SNAP-R, and you must use that system to apply for a license. And there are also temporary export licenses, exemptions for either agency. The Defense Trade Control, Director of Defense Trade Controls, they also have temporary export licenses and temporary import licenses. So if you have a military article and you want to export it temporarily to a potential foreign customer to do a demo maybe, and when you're done with the demo, you're going to bring it back to the States. That requires a separate export license. Or maybe you want to temporarily import a military article. You're considering buying it, and you want to make sure it works properly and satisfies your requirements. That requires a temporary import license, a separate type of license from Director of Defense Trade Controls. And within the Department of Commerce, there are what are called license exceptions. That means you don't need a license if the export meets certain requirements. One of the license exceptions, in fact, one of the most common ones, is called EXP, temporary export, TMP. And the TMP exception allows you to temporarily export a potentially licensable product. And you can export it for 6 months and bring it back, and you don't need no stinking license. But in all these cases, once again, I'll caution, it's one thing to have a license or to have a license exemption, but it has to be declared properly. If it's not declared properly on export, that can have the shipment can be seized for failure to declare an exemption correct. So make sure that you, and if you're using a freight forwarder to help you with this, make sure your freight forwarder knows how to handle licensed shipments, or else you got to find another forwarder. Okay, next page. Okay, where do you find all these regulations? The Director of Defense Trade Controls enforce what's called the ITAR, International Traffic in Arms Regulations. You can find that at the website, DDTC PM, as in political military, pmddtc.state.gov. Or you can look it up online. Just Google it, ITAR. You'll find the regulations in no time. Or in 22 CFR part 130 to 22 CFR part 110 to 120. Okay. The export administration regulations, that's the regulations that apply to exports of commercial, dual use, and some defense articles and technology. You can find those at bis.doc.gov, Bureau of Industry and Security at departmentofcommerce.gov. Or you can just Google EAR, and oftentimes you can tell an export geek from a non-export geek. An export geek will always say EAR. A non-export geek will say EAR. Okay, either way. Or you can just Google export administration regulations, and you'll find those online. We also find them at 15 CFR. OFAC regulations. They have their own set of regulations that change all the time. And that's because our export sanction and embargoes change all the time. So if you want to get the latest, greatest, I'd say the regulations are fine. It's best just to go to their website, ofac.tres.gov, because they're part of the Department of Treasury. Or just Google OFAC regulations, and you'll wind up with their regulations and also their website, which has great guides on who you can export to and who you can't, and any exemptions that may apply to allow you to ship to an embargo destinations and that sort of thing. Department of Census, they have what's called the foreign trade regulations. Just Google foreign trade regulations, 15 CFR, I think part 30, and you'll wind up with the census regulations, which govern what requires an export declaration, who files the export declaration, etc. And U.S. Customs manages what's called the automated commercial environment. Automated commercial environment, also known as ACE, is Customs computer system that if you import something, the computer system both is used for declaring the shipment, filing an entry, and paying the duty. And it all goes through their ACE system. And this is something you can, if you're an exporter or you're an importer or you do both, I urge you sign up for what's called the ACE portal. The ACE portal is free, so the price is right. Furthermore, Customs will help you apply for it. They have an 800 number you can call and you can apply for it. What the ACE portal has in it, there's an import ACE portal and export ACE portal. It's a listing of all your transactions. It provides detail on everything you've imported and everything you've exported. And it's recommended sign up for that, called the ACE portal. And U.S. Customs and Border Protection at cbp.gov. So you go to cbp.gov and you click on the trade tab, and you can probably just do a search there for ACE, ACE, and it'll have detailed instructions on how you can apply for the ACE portal. And there's an import ACE portal and an export ACE portal. You can sign up for both. It's free. And it has all your information there, everything you've imported and exported, how much duty you paid, whether license was declared, etc. It's all there for you to see, and you can do searches and that kind of stuff. So there are the different regulations. There are tons of other ones if you like regulations, but now we'll go to the next page. Okay, so what have we learned as a summary? Exporting a lot of opportunities. That's the purpose of this organization. Give you opportunities for exporting and expanding your sales. And that's all good. The U.S. needs exports, needs lots of exports. So go out there and export and be successful. But in order to be successful, you better be aware of export regulations and export embargoes and restrictions. That can limit what you can do and maybe even get you in hot water. And if something is regulated, or export is regulated, requires a license, requires an agreement, requires an exemption, be aware that's going to take longer. And because everything has to be put in place before you can export stuff. And so look before you leap. Check it out. Most things don't require an export license or an exemption, but some things do. Most parties you can ship to and it's no problem, but there are other ones out there which are very problematic because they're on a blacklist or they're embargoed, etc. So do your homework before you export and go out and be successful. And I think that's it for now on my part. And I think we're on time.
We are. Any questions?
No question.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, Bruce.
Okie doke.
Yeah, you mentioned that most products do not require licenses, but you have to check first to find out. So
Yeah.
who do you check with to find out if you need a license or not?
Oh boy. All those different agencies I described, that's I would go to, if it's the first issue is it a commercial product or a military product? military product, you have to go investigate the ITAR. And you have to go to the website, pmddtc.state.gov, and go check the ITAR regulations. You'll find them at that site, and that'll tell you whether that requires a license. Most likely, if something requires a license, it's going to be from Department of Commerce because it's a commercial or dual use product. And for that, go to bis.doc.gov, and there you'll find the Export Administration regulations. You can also talk to a counselor. They have an office in Orange County, and you'll find that office in Orange County at the same site. You'll find their address and phone number, and you can go visit them. I believe they're in Irvine, and you can go and speak to them there and talk to an export counselor saying, I'm thinking about exporting such and such. And they can look it up and tell you whether or not that requires a license or an exemption, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's no restrictions on it. So there's some places to look. Another question?
If you find out through these means, or I believe there are also lists like the munitions list or the commerce control list, where you can look up a product by its alphabetic name or even by its ECCN number. But if you find out that you don't need a license, how do you reflect that on your shipping declaration?
Yeah, if the export is value is commercial, in other words, not personal, and is worth more than $2,500, it doesn't require a license. The freight forwarder still has to file an export declaration on that. And on the declaration, they will indicate NLR. There's a space on the export declaration for export authority or license, and they'll put the magic letters NLR on there. No license required. And as far as the export classification is what's called EAR 99, that means no license required.
Okay, any other questions?
No question.
All right, well, it's a very complicated subject, but Bruce gave a limited amount of time and he covered the basics for you. So again, we can follow up if you have any specific questions later on. We can take a 5-minute break now, and we'll resume with my presentation on complying with foreign import requirements.
Hi, good morning. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I received your email and I'm gonna fill that out and send it to you on today. I think you gave me to the 25th to fill it out.
Yes.
Okay, I'll make sure that I send it to you on today, so be looking out for it, okay?
Yes, what you're referring to is you've been selected or confirmed as a export 101 client, right? It means you work with me. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And any others that I've notified that are part of the 101 or confirmed as 101, I sent you a message asking for specific information, I guess by Friday. Yes, that's what Keisha is talking about. Okay, so we'll be back in a few minutes. Unless there's other questions. Let's try around 10:30.
Hey, real quick, this is Osiris speaking. Are you in the room, Maurice, in the chamber room?
Uh,
Okay, I just emailed what's his name? Dr. Clement, and the Clement at mail.fresnostate.edu just bounced back as address not found. I'm curious if you could find his active email for me.
Yeah, that's happened to me also, but I will remind me, if you send me an email when I get home, I'll send you
All right,
an email that does work.
I'll take another
Okay,
email. Thank you.
all right. I hope I've been talking to somebody up till this point.
For Dr. Clement, yeah, I'm not sure, but he probably needs to change the PowerPoint also if that's the email that's on there, because that's where I snagged. I'll send you an email right now.
So we'll send you an email with all the information of the speakers.
Okay, thank you. When you send that email out, can you make sure that his email is amended because it's unfunctional?
Okay, got it. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you so much.
Okay, I'm
I'm
assuming,
sorry. Hi, this
I'm
is Dr.
assuming-
Clement. Who is trying to get hold of me?
what did she say?
I'm sorry, can you repeat yourself?
This is Dr. Clement. Is someone trying to get hold of me?
No, I was trying to get hold of Dr. Keith, the cybersecurity guy.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Clement. I'm not Dr. Key.
Yeah, Dr. Keith. No, his name is Clement too. He's Keith Clement.
Okay,
But nice to meet you, Margarita. Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Yeah, different Dr. Clement. Thank you, sweetheart.
Thank you.
all right, are we ready to get back? All right, back to our presentation.
Oh, Maurice.
Sorry?
Sorry, this is Dr. Margarita Clement. You sent an email regarding the 2-day workshop boot camp at Loyola.
Yes,
I just want to know if we are eligible to attend.
yes, you are eligible to attend. If you and your, is it Lailana?
Yeah, Lelaine.
If both of you want to get the free CGBP training at LMU, as long as you have, which you do, so I'm not even gonna bother about that, 2 years of work experience or 2 years of education at the college level, you qualify. So I think we sent a message out with the link to the registration for that free CGBP training. Okay?
So I guess I'm qualified having my doctor's degree.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
If you don't get that link, let me know.
Okay.
We'll get it to you.
I shall do so. Thank you so kindly.
Okay, so I think I've been talking about import restrictions. I'm not sure whether everybody is hearing that, but we're now on a page that we're talking about non-tariff barriers, which are usually the barriers that most affect imports, not so much tariffs until recently. So there's a whole series of things called non-tariff barriers. One of them are restrictions. One category is restrictions to protect the domestic economy. Those could include quotas. You can only import X amount of a product during the year or a quarter or whatever. Then there are specialized import licenses and permits. Some countries, these are mostly developing countries, not the advanced countries, might say, if you want to import this product or that product, you're going to need to obtain an import license or permit, or obtain a foreign exchange permit. And the reasons for those are where the economies need to worry about their balance of trade and foreign exchange reserves. So they try to control what comes into the country, both so as not to use up the foreign exchange and not to unduly hurt domestic industry. Then there's a series of non-tariff barriers to protect public health and safety, such as things that say you cannot export this item if it has pests in it. in the food, or it's a hazardous material or something, you can export it, but you will need to obtain a special export permit or certificate, generally from a US agency like Food and Drug Administration, USDA, Agriculture, or other agencies that control those hazardous or toxic or other products. They all have the ability to issue export certificates. They may be called different things, like a certificate of free trade that FDA would issue for cosmetics and medical supplies and pharmaceuticals, or they may just be called a food export certificate or some other export certificate. But those are certificates you obtain from a US agency to attest to the fact that this product is basically the same one we use in the US, that we're trying to export it. We're not trying to dump something unsafe or unsavory or whatever is on a foreign country. And then there are technical standards that need to be protected by foreign countries. So they have restrictions to comply with those standards. Quite often they are electrical standards, but there are other technical standards. And in Europe, you may need a CE mark on the product in order to get it into the European market. Some importers or countries may require an ISO certification to satisfy a government procurement or some other import requirement. How do you comply? Again, usually you get the export certificate from the US or the supplier country that the foreign countries recognize, and they generally do recognize these certificates from FDA or USDA or the hazmat people or whatever. Sometimes there may be a request by a buyer to get an inspection certificate to make sure that the buyer is getting the product that they really want. And it's not a lower quality product. It has to meet certain specifications, and they will ask to have that product inspected by an inspecting agency in the US market. The next slide. These are other types of non-tariff barriers you might find. For example, if you're promoting a product in the market, they don't want you to use culturally offensive content, language, offensive colors, offensive symbols, words that might come off as sacrilegious or otherwise culturally offensive. So the promotional material that you use, the text that you use, should not include things that would be objectionable. Distributor requirements, not generally a problem, but some countries may require that you use local distributors, nationals, like Japanese owned distributor, in order to get the product into the market. Another problem with distributor agreements in some countries is when you have a distribution agreement with your partner in that country, you obviously want to be able to get out of it if they're not performing, so you have a termination clause. Some countries make it difficult to terminate for cause. And so you want to be sure that you have the ability to withdraw from a distribution agreement if the distributor is not performing properly. There's also some countries, not so much anymore, but in the past, that would say you cannot sell anything to us unless you boycott another country. Basically, that was back in the days when the Arab countries were boycotting anything dealing with Israel. What the US did to counter that requirement is to say it is against the US law for a US company to comply with a boycott requirement. So the US company could stand behind the US law as to why it could not comply. And since that happened, that counter action on our part with the law anti-boycott requirement, these boycott laws really don't amount to anything if they are even still used. Next slide, please. Export packaging requirements. These are the common types of packaging materials and types that are used in exporting: cartons, boxes, crates, drums, bottles, bags. They can be made of wood, cardboard, burlap, glass. So of all these types of packaging, sometimes there are restrictions or protections that are required to make sure that, let's say, the wood you're using doesn't include pests in it, that the packaging would not adversely affect the environment. Or sometimes the buyer would say, I must have the product delivered in such and such package. Next slide. These two are going to be covered in much more detail in the next, I believe, the next workshop. So I'm not going to cover them much here, but basically there are marking requirements and labeling requirements. Marking requirements usually put on the package, and labeling requirements on the product. And so these are some of the requirements that might be applied. Next slide. And just want to make sure we're okay. I'm getting into the next presentation, but this is the last slide. All these are clickable links. Now, this first one, the tariff and trade data, tariff lookup, that's not going to be much use now. It used to be you could go in and plug in your product and the country, and it would tell you what the import duty was. The import duty could change in 5 minutes from now. So I wouldn't put too much stock in that. If you want to know what the import duty is in a foreign country, go through your freight forwarder. Maybe they have access to the most latest import duty. This report here, National Trade Estimate Report on Foreign Trade Barriers, is an annually required document in the US. It's a Bible on what every country's non-tariff barriers are. You can click on that link and get to that document and look up, let's say for Argentina, you get a 20-page report on all the import regulations and barriers in that particular country. An invaluable report, readily available, updated every year by US Trade Representative. And these are other links that you can go into that explain compliance with foreign import regulations. And the last link lists the 20 countries that we have free trade agreements with. I can't say whether the free trade in those countries still exists. I'm not sure myself, but that's the way it used to be. And that's all I have. I don't know if there are any questions. If not, we can move on to the next presentation. Very important. Took me a while to find somebody who could talk about this topic. I couldn't find anybody in our region. And through my contacts in an organization called NASBITE, I was able to track down Dan Crow in Missouri, I believe, who's an expert on intellectual property protection. So I'm turning it over to Dan Crow. And Dan is a partner in the intellectual property group at BCLP, which is a global law firm with over 1,200 lawyers. He handles patent infringement cases across industries, including technology, automotive, medical devices, consumer products, and also has experience with trademark and copyright litigation. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan right now. If he wants to elaborate on what he does and his experience, that's fine. Then he can get into his very important topic. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Dan.
thank you for that introduction. As he said, I'm an intellectual property attorney, and that's going to be the topic today is if you decide to sell products outside the United States, what should you do, preferably before you begin to sell them, to safeguard that intellectual property? So we're first going to talk about, let's make sure we're all on the same page. What is intellectual property? And I am, the whole talk will be assuming that the owner of the intellectual property is a business based in the United States, who may or may not be manufacturing products in the United States, but is at least selling those products outside the United States. So intellectual property really falls down to four buckets. There are inventions, there are literary works, there are names and symbols, and there is a catch-all competitively sensitive information, which could be data, sales information, customer list, a secret process for making your product. All that would fall into the fourth bucket. So technically, we refer to these four as first patents, which patents prevent others from making a product. Trademarks, which of course is the brand, which could be a word, it could be a symbol, could be almost anything. Copyright protects an expression of a work. So, that could be music, books, advertisements, software is subject to copyright protection. And then that last category that I mentioned was trade secrets, which would protect information that you have kept secret and is competitively valuable. And one of the things to note is that you can have all four of these types of protection on a single product. And so here I'm using an example of a pair of Nike tennis shoes. And so you might have a patent on the design of the bottom tread of the shoe. You of course have a trademark, which could be a word and it could be a symbol here. You might have some copyrightable material. Sometimes somebody will, when they ship their product, they'll include a little story about the product. And so that story could be copyrighted. And then finally, you might have a trade secret on, how you attach the sole to the upper, which you've elected not to get patent protection on for reasons we'll explain, but rather you're retaining it as a trade secret. So, and I'll go through each of these four categories in a little more detail. A patent gives you the right to exclude others from essentially making and selling your product. The important thing to note is that it is a negative monopoly, meaning it doesn't give you the right to do anything. It simply gives you the right to prevent others from doing things, and that's a common misperception. The example I like to use is, let's pretend like there are no chairs in the world, and the only thing that people sit on are stools. So it has a seat and it has four legs. And somebody has a patent on that stool. So nobody else can make nobody else can make the stools except for the owner of the stool patent. You come along and you say, hey, I have an idea on how to improve that stool. I can put a back on it, be a hell of a lot more comfortable to sit. You can get a patent on that improvement, which you've decided to call a chair, and a chair has a seat, four legs, and a back. And you can prevent others from making and selling the chair. However, you can't yourself sell the chair because the chair, by definition, has a seat and four legs. So that's kind of an example of where, yes, you have the patent on a chair, but you still can't sell the chair because someone has a more dominant patent on the basic product. And now, in reality, these things would be solved potentially by way of both companies cross-licensing each other to make stools and chairs. Many reasons to protect your invention, beyond just, perhaps suing someone for infringing your patent. You might want to just showcase your technology to your customers. You could license your patent out and generate revenue. It can also be a source of recognition for your employees, your engineers, or your designers who are coming up with these ideas. There is a balance when you decide to obtain a patent. You have to fully disclose how to make and use your invention to the public by way of filing an application to the United States Patent Office. And if you are successful and you get that patent, then the government gives you this limited monopoly right. So the government expects you to advance science by giving full disclosure. The government in return will give you a limited right. Currently, that is 20 years from the date you file your application. And then you may decide, and then after 20 years, anybody can make your invention. So you may decide that, I've got a trade secret on how I attach the sole to the upper of my shoe. I don't think anybody's going to figure out how to do that by purchasing my shoes. And I think it's going to be useful for decades and decades and decades. And so I'm going to retain that as a trade secret and not obtain a patent on it. And, the classic example is the formula for Coca-Cola. Centuries ago, Coke decided not to try to get patent protection on that chemical formula, and instead have retained it as a trade secret. The key is you have to retain it as a secret, and if someone independently can reverse engineer it, then they would be able to compete with you. Essentially, two types of patents: utilities and design. Utility protects the way the invention essentially works, where a design protects the way a product looks, its ornamental appearance. Big difference between the two in terms of what you need to show the patent office. For a utility patent, you have to show that it's new, that it's useful, and that it is not obvious. And for a design patent, you have to show that it's new, not obvious, and also ornamental. So I said new, and novelty is judged. In other words, the examiners at the patent office will judge novelty based on what they call prior art, which is essentially everything that has come before and is publicly available. So that could be, printed publications, prior patents. It could be information that you put out in some kind of a poster presentation at a conference, or, handing out marketing materials to a customer without any non-disclosure in place, or anything that's otherwise available to the public. So if you were to demonstrate your invention publicly, then that becomes part of the prior art, and the patent office can use that to decide whether your invention is in fact new. In the United States, there is a 1-year grace period after a public disclosure. So you could take your product to a trade show, show it off, sell it, and you have 1 year within which to file your patent application. In other words, you're still eligible for a patent application for 1 year. Outside the United States, in the vast majority of the countries, they have what they call an absolute novelty requirement, which means that once you or anyone makes your invention publicly known, then it's too late to file a patent application. So, the guideline is if you're interested in protection outside the United States, make sure you do something before you publicly disclose your invention. That do something is filing a patent application, and we'll go through the process here in a minute. So essentially, most U.S.-based companies where their employees, their engineers, their designers are based in the U.S., they will file their first application in the United States. And that can be one of at least two varieties, a provisional patent application and the aptly named non-provisional patent application. And then they will follow that US application up with applications, one or more applications outside the United States. I think one of the concepts here is that in the US and in most other countries, it is a first to file is entitled to the patent. If you remember, if anybody knows from decades ago, the patent office would award the patent to the first person who could demonstrate that they invented it. And so you had this process where inventors would write up a disclosure and then mail it to themselves. So they had, some kind of proof as to when they conceived of their invention. So the United States abandoned that sort of a concept, fell in line with the rest of the world. So now it's a race to the patent office. So if you think someone else is, chasing the same tree and might come up with the same idea, you want to get your application on file before they do. I mentioned provisional patent applications. Some people have probably heard of these. It is a less expensive way to begin the patent process. But importantly, your application is never examined. It just merely gives you a filing date and allows you to file a later full patent application and claim the benefit of the earlier filing date. So we use this sometimes if we get a call from a company and they say, hey, we're getting ready to go to a trade show tomorrow. What can we do? Then we can file a quick and dirty provisional patent application to at least have something on file. So outside the United States, many US companies use what is called the Patent Cooperation Treaty, a treaty signed by the United States and most of the industrialized world. It is a single international application that will be examined. It's important to note that there are no patents that issue out of this. It is merely a vehicle to eventually allow you to file in other countries of interest by entering what they call the national phase. So it delays the time that you otherwise might have to file outside the US and therefore delay the cost. And it gives you, some idea. Perhaps you've started to market your product and you get some idea of whether it's going to be successful before you start filing applications outside the U.S. So, where do people file outside the U.S.? I think the typical answer is we want you to file where you think you're going to have customers, where you're manufacturing your products, and where you're going to have customers so that if you had an infringement, say in Spain, would it cause enough of a revenue loss that you would be upset about that? And a lot of times, at the beginning stages of marketing a product, you really have no idea. But, here's where some of the typical companies file: Canada, Mexico, China. And then regionally, you can file one application in the European Patent Office and eventually get a patent in, up to 35 or more of the member states of the European Patent Office. So that's it on patents. But again, I don't know that I mentioned this. So the process would be to file an application in the United States, and then you have to, within 12 months, begin the process of filing outside the United States. So typically, you would file an application under that Patent Cooperation Treaty. That buys you another 18 months. So if you were to file a patent application in the US in 2025, 30 months later, in late 2027, you would have to go through the expense of filing in all of these different countries: China, South Korea, Europe. And hopefully after 30 months, you have an idea of whether it's worth it. It typically takes 1 to 3 years from filing the application in the US to obtaining a patent. And you or your attorney would have some back and forth communications with the examiners at the patent office to try to decide whether or not you're entitled to a patent, and if so, what is the scope of those exclusive rights. Moving to trademarks now. Trademarks, is typically a word, a symbol, like the Nike swoosh. It can also be a color. The sound of the Aflac duck is protected. And then there's even trademarks on scented motor oils. So it's really anything that people would see, hear, smell, and identify that with a particular source of origin. Trademarks can generally fall into 4 categories. The generic term for the product, like gasoline, a descriptive word, like gas and go, or a filling station, suggestive, like mobile for oil, or arbitrary and fanciful, like Xerox or Pepsi. And that's where you want to pick your marks. You want to pick it into the arbitrary and fanciful mark category, because that's going to give you broader protection. You can't get protection for the generic word. It's difficult to get protection for a merely descriptive word, but you can get them more so for suggestive and arbitrary words. And so this is always a challenge between, the marketing person at the company who wants to pick a brand that will, easily resonate with customers because it's very, very close to the generic name of the product, versus if you were to pick a name like Xerox, you would then have to spend a lot of marketing money to try to build up name recognition in that. But if you can do so, that's the most powerful protection you're going to have. You can register your trademarks at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. You can do so once you start using the trademark in commerce, called actual use, or you can reserve your place by filing what's called an intent to use application, meaning you've thought of what brand you want to use, but you haven't started selling your product yet. You haven't started using that brand in commerce. So you file an intent to use application. The trademark office will still examine it and indicate whether they're willing to give you a registration. But at the end of the day, you have to then begin using the trademark, begin, putting it on packaging and selling your product, and then go back to the trademark office, prove that you've done so, and they'll issue you a registration. As part of the application, you have to list the goods or services, or both, that you're going to use your brand in connection with. And so if you're going to use it on coffee cups and clothing and software, you have to list all those different goods and services, and then you actually have to use the brand on all those goods and services. And so that's where a lot of the time is spent in preparing trademark applications, making sure you've adequately covered all the goods and services that you might use the brand in connection with. Outside the United States, so trademarks are territorial. So if you use and obtain a registration in the U.S., that's only going to give you protection in the U.S. So if you are concerned about people infringing on your trademark rights outside the United States, you would need to file applications in each of those countries. Many countries are a first to file jurisdiction. So it's relatively important to file. While there's no deadline, it is important to file your trademark applications outside the United States so that you don't find someone, in another country who recognizes that your product is selling well in the United States. You may bring it to that particular country and they beat you to the trademark office, and you end up in a situation where you essentially have to pay them off in order to obtain the trademark rights. And so that's what this slide is geared to. Many trademark applications can be blocked by companies that already own similar marks, so make sure you file early. Just a couple of keys for filing trademark applications outside the United States. You would want to file what I call defensive applications, so you want to cover broad ranges of classes of goods and services. Something you may expand to in the future. You might want to file country-oriented language versions of your marks. So Chinese translation of whatever your brand is. You can file both the English word and for the Chinese symbols in the Chinese trademark office. And many countries, including the U.S., have a process for recording your trademark registrations with their customs administrations. And this can aid in asking the customs office, the government essentially, to block imports that are infringing upon your trademark rights. In other words, counterfeit goods. How do you register your mark outside the United States? It's kind of similar to patents, where you typically file first in the U.S. and then you would file outside the U.S. There is another protocol. It's called the Madrid Protocol, which many industrialized countries have signed on to. It's a centralized application that will be examined, and then you can nationalize that registration in up to 130 countries. And so you can use this Madrid Protocol process as long as you file under the Madrid Protocol within 6 months of filing in the U.S. So it's a different time frame from patents. Patents is file in the U.S., 12 months to file outside the U.S. Trademarks, file in the U.S., 6 months to begin the process of filing outside the U.S. Moving to copyrights. Copyright, once you write that poem, make that movie, record that song, write that software, you own the copyright in that. And it gives you the right to authorize others to copy it or distribute it or perform it, or to create what are called derivative works, so to modify it. A derivative work might be a play that's based on a movie, or a movie that's based on a play. Those are all called derivative works. So it gives the author of the book the right to control that. What is copyrightable? And I've given about 6 examples. Advertisements are copyrightable, software, product packaging can be copyrightable. It's really anything that is a work of authorship that's created by a person. Interestingly, there was a recent case on whether software written by an AI machine is copyrightable, and at least the one court decided it was not, because it was not created by a person. So what's not copyrightable? A very, very short phrase, like a short advertising tagline, is generally not copyrightable because it doesn't have at least a modicum of creativity. And then also, copyrights do not protect ideas. So one example of that, where if you had written the software that drives Excel, a spreadsheet program, you have a right to prevent somebody from copying your software that generates those tables and things, but it does not protect the idea itself. So someone else can come along and take the idea of this spreadsheet, write their own, and they're not violating any copyrights that you own. So what I said is, as soon as you sit down and write that poem or write that advertising marketing piece, you own it. And what I mean by that is the law recognizes that the individual person that created that advertising piece or that piece of software, that person owns it under the law initially. And so you would want to have what's called work for hire provisions. So as long as it's an employee who's doing the software development within the scope of their employment, that will be automatically work for hire, and the company would own it. Where a lot of companies, particularly small companies, get tricked up is where they hire an outside contractor to write software or to write an instruction manual or really to write anything. That's not considered a work made for hire, even though people think that it is. So you do need to put a contract in place where the outside contractor recognizes that she has a duty to assign any copyrights over to the company that she's employed with or she is contracted with. You can also have a concept of joint ownership where maybe you had a contractor and an employee working on a piece of software. And so there might be issues of joint ownership. And so I think the key takeaway is that if you have the misperception that just because you're paying someone to write something for you does not automatically make it a work for hire. Use a contract to close the loop. Some people have also heard about fair use. In other words, you're using a snippet of a song, or you're using a piece of someone else's software. And and you say, well, it's fair use because you've heard that term. Fair use is a fairly limited doctrine. It really only applies to where you're critiquing or commenting or using it in an academic situation. So, if someone is writing a review of a book, it's okay for them to put in snippets of the book because that is part and parcel of them writing their comment. Or teaching a class, you can use certain portions of copyrighted material. And I've listed some of the factors that a court may analyze to see whether or not the person who's using the material gets the benefit of fair use or does not. There's no registration necessary to have a copyright. Like I said, once you write that poem, you own the copyright. But you can take the step of registering your rights with the U.S. Copyright Office, and there are some advantages to doing so. Frankly, other than pure literary pieces, so for software, for marketing material, most companies don't register their copyrights until there's a problem, and then they'll register it because then that will, if necessary, allow them to file a lawsuit in federal court. Okay, so outside the United States, there's no such thing as an international copyright law. There's not these treaties like you see for registering patents and trademarks. But each country generally has signed on to the same ideas about what is copyrightable and the ownership of it and how to enforce it. And so you can enforce your copyrights, against someone who might steal your materials in, China or Chile or anywhere else. So again, if you are engaging a third party outside the United States to help you create copyrightable material, make sure you get the work for hire provisions. And then the other thing we tell people is to employ some strong technical measures to protect your copyright, particularly here I'm talking particularly about software. Trade secrets are basically like confidential information, but they satisfy a couple requirements. One is it has to be secret. So you're taking reasonable steps to keep the formula for Coca-Cola a secret, and it gives you some kind of commercial value. So again, trade secrets we might see in customer lists, product development plans, things of that nature. How to assemble your product, that you might, create a form to do that and give it to your overseas manufacturer. So a few more slides on some of the key strategies in the IP or intellectual property area. First of all, we've been talking mostly about protecting your own IP, but you also want to not step on someone else's IP rights. And you can do that by conducting some patent and trademark searches in advance of bringing a product to the market, see if anyone else has a patent on it, and conduct a trademark search before you begin using a brand and investing money in marketing that brand. We've talked about registering your IP rights. I think it's also important when you're working with foreign partners, particularly where you're working with an overseas manufacturer, to do significant research on that partner, understand their reputation and track record for IP compliance. A lot of companies will use an agent overseas to help them evaluate potential manufacturing partners. Once you find that manufacturing partner, get a good contract in place. Don't rely on your agent. Get that contract directly between you as the company, as the owner of the IP, and the manufacturer. lot of the agents that are out there in the developing world will say, "Don't worry, I'll put the manufacturer under a contract." That's not good enough. You can use master service agreements that clearly outline IP rights, ownership, licensing, other terms like that. I mentioned implementing some security measures. So, you would want to restrict access to any sensitive data, those servers that have the sensitive data on it. That data could be, customer data, it could be product data, could be almost anything. In the software world, in the digital world, you could use digital watermarking, which, you could then use to trace infringements of some of your copyrightable material on the internet. So in other words, a lot of photos that are out there have an invisible digital watermark that a company can track to see if their photos that they've put up on their website have been copied and downloaded elsewhere. Another idea is if you're developing a computer type product and you're having a manufacturer build the product, pick someone else to download the firmware into that product. And that way, no one company both, creates the final product. You have at least two that are involved in it. So final considerations, create a basket of rights. I gave you the example of the tennis shoe. Go ahead and try to obtain your patents on it, decide what you want to retain as a trade secret, obtain your trademark registration, create this whole basket of rights around your product. It's up to you to monitor, investigate, enforce. Sometimes government customs offices will assist, but it's generally up to you. Keep good records if you need to enforce your rights, your ownership of it. If you purchased a brand from some other company, or you have a patent license from some other company, or you have, a contractor who's developing software for you, make sure you keep all those records. And then, a couple of other ideas on the foreign manufacturing side, use written agreements, split the production of components. I have one client that makes a commercial product that's for sale in the United States, and it is essentially 3 different components. They have 3 different manufacturers in Vietnam and China make the individual components. Then they have another company who actually assembles it all together, again, to try to avoid products going out the back door onto the black market. I mentioned downloading firmware elsewhere. And then also you want to try to control the importation of your product. So you don't want to have a rogue importer out there who's diverting some of the product elsewhere. So those, I think that brings me to the end. And so hopefully I've given you some hints on what is intellectual property, and, types of intellectual property, how to protect it in the United States, and then some things to think about when you begin to market or sell your products or manufacture your products outside the US.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. I think we do have some questions, right?
Yes.
One of them, if I'm reading it, what if you patented your US product over a year ago and didn't file for protecting overseas within a certain time? How does that affect protecting your IP outside the US?
So there are a couple questions that came in through the chat. Someone had a question with respect to a skincare product, which one is better, a trade secret or a patent? I think this would apply to any product, but if someone can reverse engineer it, then you want to go the patent route. So if I'm a skilled chemist and I'm able to buy your skincare product at Walgreens, put it through some equipment and reverse engineer the formula, then you want to get a patent because you would have the rights to that. If that's impossible or nearly impossible, then you could rely upon trade secrets, because in other words, no one can reverse engineer. A trade secret will not protect someone from independently developing your product. It's only if they steal it, if you will. So I had another question that says, what if you already patented your product in the US and now you want to, and it's been more than a year, and you'd like to get patent protection outside the US? Short answer is too late. The better answer is if you're continuously making improvements to your product, you could file another patent on that narrow improvement and then timely file your applications outside the United States.
I have a question. I think someone patent.
Another question.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
If you're going to license your product outside the United States, do you need to have a patent first? The answer is not necessarily. You could license your invention for development, marketing, even, at any time. And what you see is sometimes there'll be especially if it's patent pending, maybe they're going to pay a nickel per product that they make and sell. But if you obtain a patent, then perhaps that royalty goes up to $2 or something like that. So you'll see manufacturers pay a lower royalty during the patent pending phase, and then a higher royalty once the patent issues.
I think somebody had a question from the audience.
Hi, I wanted to know, I believe the slogan is patent already. You can't eat just one. But can I add that to a jingle for my products? If I had a jingle, a song jingle, can I add that to my jingle?
I think that's all the questions, unless I'm missing any due to my
There was a question
inappropriate
from the
Zoom
audience.
skills.
Dan, can you hear me? I don't think he's
I think his headphones are still intact.
Dan, I think there's some questions. Can you hear us?
I don't think you can hear. Dan?
No, I cannot hear anybody.
Oh.
Can you hear now?
So I apologize for that, but I think something happened with my audio connection. Hopefully you've been hearing me, but I can't hear you.
Oh, okay.
So if somebody would wave their hand to let me know that I have been heard. No.
Chris, did you have a question?
No, I was waving my hand so he could tell that he could be heard.
I'm still waiting for him to answer my question.
You may have to type it in.
Oh, God.
Well, if this isn't working, then those of you who have questions, if you can put them in an email to us, we'll get them to Dan and he can answer them offline. I don't know why it's not working. But if there's nothing else we can do about Q&A, we'll move on. Dan, thank you very much for your presentation. If you can hear me. I don't know that he can hear me.
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right, good. Okay, I believe that they patented the slogan, you can't eat just one. But if I make a jingle to my chocolates, can I use into my jingle, my song, you can't eat just one?
So you want to try to protect the slogan that you've came up with.
No. The slogan, you can't eat just one, I think it's with Lay's potato chips or something. But I wanted to know if I can use that word, you can't eat just one, in my jingle, the song to the product.
And what is your product again?
I have a sugar-free chocolate.
Okay. So I think the safer route would be to say no, because the issue is whether a consumer, an ordinary consumer, might be confused that there's some kind of affiliation between your product and the potato chips.
So, the fact that your product might be sold in a convenience store or a grocery store, for example, and that's not going to be a discerning
That
buyer.
would be the jingle on the commercial. That would be a jingle.
Understand, but you're using a phrase that has been used by the potato chip company, and they have rights in that phrase. And if they can show that your use of the same phrase on a jingle or otherwise is confusingly similar, or ordinary consumer would be confused, then they could, seek to prevent you. So if you said that you were going to use that jingle in connection with selling $30 million homes, where somebody who's going to purchase that home knows who you are, knows who you're dealing with, then I think you could probably do that. But if you're selling a product in a similar store where an ordinary consumer, does not discern between, you don't spend a lot of time deciding what potato chips or other products you're purchasing at the grocery store. In other words, they're not a discerning purchaser. Then I think it would be unlawful to use that same slogan.
That would be trademark infringement, right?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think if you have other questions, you can email them to us or message Sandra. I think we'll move on. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate very much your presentation. Our next presentation is two topics combined into one. That's not easy to do. One is how to deal with corruption and demands for bribes. You may know that a number of countries, bribery and corruption are endemic. You have to figure out how to deal with it, and it comes at petty levels and high levels. That's one topic. How do you deal with corruption and often demand for bribes that come along with corruption? Our presenter is Chris Schrage from the University of Northern Iowa, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
Chris, I've known Chris for a long time as well. She served on the board of NASBITE with me for many years. She's taken students all over the world. She does CGBP training. And when I look for somebody who could cover these two kind of obscure topics of dispute resolution and dealing with bribes, guess what? She happens to have presented on both for a NASBITE occasion. So we got a twofer, and I'll turn it over to Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so I share my own slides, or do you guys have them?
You could share your own, or I could share.
Either way.
Okay.
Which
Oh.
one?
What do you prefer?
I'll bring it up here.
Okay.
Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, then we're in good shape. I think. There we go. All right. So yes, the thing of it is 45 minutes is not enough to cover either one of these. So we're going to have a, if you will, quick and dirty overview of things that people can do to make sure that they protect themselves or do not get themselves involved in illegal activities. And then how to handle those situations when you have conflicts within your supply chain or with whomever you're doing business with. And I am an associate professor of instruction at UNI. I have been teaching since January of '98. My first profession was in agribusiness, which I spent 20 years in before I became an instructor. I am one of the first 100 CGBPs and have had our program here as an accredited program for a number of years as well. So when we look at bribery and corruption, we'll start there. We need to somehow or another break the corruption chain. To get involved in corruption is destructive for your own organization, but and can lead to a pathway of more risk than if you just say no. I'm not going to be involved. And so we'll look at some of these things, the clarification of what bribery really is, different laws concerning bribery, and clarification of the grease payments from the U.S. perspective and global corruption levels. So, we do need to realize that giving and receiving bribes are both criminal offenses and usually considered felonies, and which are more often than not punishable by imprisonment of more than 1 year. Punishment for bribery, of course, includes fines, restitution, possibly community service, and probation for doing those things. Public officials or employees of public agencies who accept bribes may have to leave office or dismissed from their jobs for receiving bribes. And they might find themselves ineligible to work in public service in the future or to work for government agencies, which, if that is your passion, to be denied that would be really tough to deal with. And as I said, these restitutions of convicted individuals can happen. But simply put, bribery is defined as the giving or accepting of a bribe. And a bribe doesn't have to be money. It can be gifts of large value or even smaller gifts. It can be providing access to other individuals that maybe you wouldn't have access to otherwise. Or, for example, providing opportunities like scholarships or someone's children being able to go to another university that they wouldn't be able to as part of the deal to help them get a contract. All right. So basically, the bribe itself is used to influence a decision maker or government official to gain a contract or other benefits from the transaction. Years ago, when the Winter Olympics were held in Salt Lake City, Utah, there was discussion that possibly, quote, bribery was used by the Utah organizers to the committee deciding on where to have the Olympics by giving them trips to Disneyland with their families, or again, the whole aspect of providing scholarships to a U.S. university, those kinds of things. And you will find the United States has its level of corruptions, but we also have a lot of things put in place to try and convince people not to be involved in bribery. So definitely the United States has the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, was put into place under Jimmy Carter, whose focus was on having a good set of business practices in the U.S. and around the world that restricted corruption and tried to keep business practices very honest and straightforward. Canada has what they call the Corruption of Foreign Public Officials Act that was put into place. And the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, put together Article 9 of the Anti-Bribery Convention. The United Nations does have a convention against corruption. The United States was probably the leader in putting something together to focus on this. And as they did that, then more and more countries have followed suit in trying to reduce corruption in business practices, especially with governments. So, like I said, in the United States, Carter in 1977 put this together. The idea was to be more transparent, especially in publicly held companies, so that people knew that if they were investing in companies that had been participating in corruption prior to making those investments. It does prohibit payments to third parties that could be channeled. So it's not just direct corruption or bribery, but an indirect avenue is considered illegal as well. The thing of it was, US businesses then started complaining, okay, in other countries, companies can be, bribe officials, and that puts US companies at a disadvantage, ties one hand behind their back, and all of these kinds of things. So under Reagan in 1988, what was done was the Omnibus Trade and Competitiveness Act allowed for what we call grease payments. And these apply to situations where you have a transactional situation going on. Maybe bringing things through customs or trying to get licenses or permits put into place, okay? So if these are allowed in the foreign country, and it has to be written, it can't be just hearsay or oral law, these can be put into place for facilitating things to happen faster, okay? So in many countries, minor officials have very low salaries, and they have a tendency to pay attention to transactions by those who are willing to help them with their, if you will, salaries and so forth, to expedite a transaction. So let's say, and where this comes about, for example, let's say you have a piece of equipment that was manufactured in another country in your operations at home, and a major part breaks. And this is costing you millions of dollars a day for that piece of equipment to be sitting idle when you need to get a part through customs to be able to get it into the machine and continue your operations. All right. So in cases like this, you've ordered the part, it's sitting in customs, waiting to come through. And because you haven't done a lot of dealings and stuff with those operations, maybe they have other people that have paid more attention to them in the past, and they're getting it through faster. Okay. So what you do is you give a facilitating payment to that officer that is going to then allow that part to be sent on to you, and you can put it in the machine and continue operations and not lose a tremendous amount of money. In that case, that is a grease payment that is allowed. Or you need to ship some things, and you now have to get a special permit or a license. And again, it's a routine governmental action that you need sped up because it might take 6 months to 9 months, something like that. In that case, then those grease payments are allowed. Now, the key is you can't keep paying the same person for speeding up things over and over and over again. That is watched. And it's usually for a one-time deal that needs to be done, not a routine thing that you could plan for because that's the case. And the government does watch for those routine payments, if you're paying the same person, every month to facilitate the movement of your product through, they're saying, no, that's not a true grease payment, that you need to plan ahead for that in your shipping and lead times. And so be careful on what you want to consider grease payments. So how do we overcome corruption? Okay. It's a tough one, especially in countries where this type of behavior has been around for a long time. And back when the grease payment omnibus trade agreement was put into place by Reagan, companies in Germany could count a bribe as a business expense and take it off their taxes. Okay, so how do you combat those types of things? Well, one, we have to get governments to have the will, if you will, to put into place regulations, agreements, considerations, all of those kinds of things to be able to stop. And so the idea is to get to a point where there's zero tolerance for corruption. And there are some companies around the world that have done that. But if we truly want this to be a clear playing field around the world, then we've got to get governments to, number one, place effective laws. Okay? Do they address those issues that create the environment where corruption is acceptable? Okay? There needs to be an independent judiciary that can enforce the laws that are put into place. It's one thing to have effective laws. The second thing is, do we have the judiciary that's going to stand behind those laws? And then third, do we have effective enforcement where things are followed through, where there are regulatory agents that take what the court says and make sure that people and organizations are being held accountable. And with that, we need a responsive public service. They get in there and they do it right away. So definitely, of course, there's evidence that there's been corruption of governments and bribery for centuries. But somehow or another, with appropriate administration of these laws and so forth, we can make a difference for the future. So how do you, as an organization or an individual, stay out of trouble? Okay, that is a huge thing to consider, because you don't want to spend time in jail. You don't want huge fines. You don't want your people, creating problems as well. So one thing to do is to designate a high-level manager in the company that is responsible to make sure everybody in the organization understands the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and knows how to comply with it. Okay? So you can't just say, okay, guys, we're not going to do this, and then not pay attention. Somebody has to make sure everyone is accountable and behaves themselves. Okay? Working in tandem with some legal counsel to make sure that you are abiding by any changes in the act or the law, any updates that might be going on. And then everyone in the company, especially the owners, the upper level people, has to show that they believe in this and demonstrate prudent, ethical decisiveness. If somebody does something wrong, you take action. You don't wash it under the carpet and pretend that it doesn't exist. Because this is something that you have to, if you will, govern by example. Okay? every contract that is written by the company should state that this company will honor the rules and regulation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Acts. You're not going to bend them. You will not tolerate the behavior in your own company or with any organization that you're doing business with. So, and that's where working with your legal counsel, you can come up with some wording to put in those contracts that you're going to follow all the time. Okay. Then put in place checkpoints or triggers that will say, hey, what's going on? And make sure that in those checkpoints, we have clean financial records that are stating everything. Great transparency. Okay. And then make sure that in every step of the import-export process, that this needs to be assessed. Is this being done in the appropriate manner? Now, companies that have been doing business for years can get caught in situations. All right. For example, John Deere. This is really quite interesting because John Deere has very strict rules for their purchasing agents to never even take a small gift. Okay. They can't be taken out to dinner by a international partner or potential partner or vendor. And people get into a lot of trouble if that happens. However, John Deere went and bought a company in Thailand and made it a new subsidiary. But they weren't proactive enough to make sure that they trained the people in this new subsidiary about how they handle situations with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And what happened was there was some bribery with the Royal Thai Airline, where there were some cash payments made. There were massage parlor visits and international travel given that resulted in convictions for a bribery scheme of $10 million. Okay, now this particular situation was John Deere did not admit or deny those violations. But because they happened between 2017 and 2020, they did pay the fine that had actually led them to $4.3 billion extra in profit because of the agreements that were put into place based on those situations. So even an established company, if they don't stay on their toes, can get into trouble as they do new business in other places where maybe the rules aren't as strong as they are in the home country in the United States. All right. So, and right here where I'm at, there are 5 major operations for John Deere corporations within just a few miles from our university. So it's a well-known company, and we know a lot of people in the supply chain operations because I work with supply chain students. And so, this is an area you really have to pay a lot of attention to. Now, one of the things that we can do, and Transparency International has resources that you can take advantage of. And this one, they haven't put up the new heat map for 2024, but the list for most corrupt countries and their rankings for 2024 is up there at transparency.org, Customs Perceptions Index. The heat map, the lighter the color, the least corrupt that country's business and government environment is. All right. And so you can see the places, the darker the color. The United States is not one of the most or the least corrupt countries, but you can see, of course, Venezuela that we hear a lot about right now is one of the most. Nicaragua has fallen into that, and I have been doing work with Nicaragua since 2001, and it has gone further corrupt during that time period than when I first started. So, and the chart actually shows you if countries improved or decreased their levels of corruption enforcement. So when getting ready to do business abroad, the first thing to do would be go to this chart and say, okay, see, does this country pay attention to corruption problems, or do they allow corruption to exist? And is this a market where I really think I should do business? You know, there's a lot of countries in the world, and you don't have to do business with every one of them. And so this can be a tool for you to see, okay, what is going on to possibly avoid some of those problems. And along with that, this just kind of shows only 2%, 2.8% of countries are in the least corrupt area. And I have found it really interesting over the years that most of these countries are either in Northern Europe or in the Pacific area, like Singapore and New Zealand. And then you see Denmark and Finland and Sweden are right up there with the highest scores. And the United States is down into, you know, they're in that third level that you can see here. But you can see that a huge portion of our world has high numbers of corruption. And so, you know, as you think about expanding, maybe look at some of these upper levels in the greens and the yellows before you start thinking about doing business in the oranges and the reds. And this is the email, or excuse me, URL for the Global Corruption Index. And I highly suggest you look at that from time to time, and it does give you some great ideas and tools and resources. So when we get into international law, okay, and being able to deal with conflict and legal disputes, there's some things that we need to look at. Okay, definitely international law is a way to the rules and the principles that nation states considered binding between themselves. And the judicial arm of the United Nations does provide some guidelines. Remember, the United Nations is not a governing body. All they can do is provide guidelines or assist with settling disputes between nations on issues of public international law. International law can be traced clear back to the 17th century with the Peace of Westphalia. Early laws were concerned mostly with war and peace, okay, and political issues. As trade has increased, and definitely in the last 50 years, we have seen a tremendous amount of increase in the interdependence economically of countries with each other. The issues of commercial affairs became much more important when it came to handling disputes. So if a nation refuses to accept a decision against what was made by the World Court, it can appeal to the Security Council of the United States and continue discussions. Now, there are two basic main types of law that countries follow. The Code of Napoleon in 1804 was the prototype, if you will, for code law system that predominates in Europe today. Okay? The US legal system is based on English common law. All right? And so we call code law civil law as well. So as we look at that in a common law country like the United States, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, okay? Disputes are decided by the reliance on authority of past judicial decisions. So, for example, oftentimes in TV criminal shows, you'll hear so-and-so versus so-and-so. And of course, the big one that we refer to here in the United States has to do with abortion, and that was Roe versus Wade, okay? Those are past decisions that were made by our judicial system that kind of dictate how we are going to be looking at future conflict decisions, okay? So that's an important aspect to consider. Everything is based on precedents, okay? Companies are legally incorporated by state authorities. So example, I have a corporation and I had to file a form and pay an administrative fee to the state of Iowa. And so there are a few things like the United States Unified Commercial Code that is used in some areas, but for the most part, most of our disputes here are settled by common law. But what if you're doing business with a civil law country? Okay. You don't just go and file lawsuits and expect the courts to come up with an answer or a decision for you. They actually have a set of codes that are put into place that when the dispute comes up, you take the situation and you look at the code that applies to that, and the decision is made on whether or not you're applying with those codes. Companies are not formed by filing with the governments. They're just contracts between two or more parties that become fully liable. Okay, so if you are a common law country and you have an agreement with someone in a civil law country, some of the things that you're going to have to worry about is how to carry out solving those disputes. Asian countries, you know, there are some that are common law, some are civil law jurisdictions, okay? Most of the countries today have civil law systems. In post-communist Eastern and Central Europe, consultants from both civil and common law countries are trying to influence the process. Okay, Central Europe relies on the German civil law system, while Russia looks to the U.S. system in some cases. Okay, Germans think U.S. law is too complicated. And the U.S. Response is, of course, that Germany is outdated. So as we look at legal systems, all right, civil law is in the teal color. Okay, common law is in the kind of a coral color. You can see a lot of that has to do with the fact that those were British colonies at some point or another. Customary law is pretty much limited to Mongolia, which is very unique in itself. Religious law is especially strong in countries where there is the majority of the population is of Muslim faith. You have mixed laws where you have both common and civil law. You can see Argentina and the Quebec area of Canada, Southern Africa are those. So how do you handle legal issues? Okay. And to prevent conflicts that are going to happen at some point or another. Okay. One, make sure you have expert legal help. Here in the United States, we have a lot of major law firms that have offices around the world that are more aware of how to deal with legal issues in the market that's involved. You may need to consult them. Quite frankly, small private firms, unless they have some very distinct relationships with various countries, are going to be have a harder time advising you on what to do. So do make sure you understand the market that you're involved with right up front and make sure you have appropriate legal counsel. So how do you prevent conflicts in the first place? Okay. One, figuring out the jurisdiction. Who is going to have the authority? Which country's laws are you going to have to follow? Can you handle it by putting things into contracts? All those kinds of things need to be looked at. The last speaker was talking about intellectual property, and he did mention the Madrid system. There is also an organization that you can go to that provides heat maps, just like the one I showed you on corruption, on where they best protect and enforce intellectual property rights. And that is updated annually as well. So you can just go in and put intellectual property rights, IPR, and you can bring that up and it will show you those. The other thing is avoiding bribery. And you say, well, we kind of discussed that, and how does that become a legal issue? Well, a lot of things. But the thing with bribery is it's like a vacuum. You might start very small, but then as you go along, the other party might start asking for more and more. And you find yourself getting into a deeper hole. And in fact, the bribery can cost you more than what you're actually making on the transactions. So yes, you might have this thing, oh yeah, we really want to do business and we want to do this and we want to be in this country. But you know what? If you fall into the trap of getting involved with bribery or giving those gifts, it's just going to get worse. And in the long run, it's going to hurt you and then get you into legal trouble as well. So just right off the bat, starting out and making it clear that you're not going to get involved with that is going to garner more respect. And maybe you might temporarily lose a contract, but that may open doors for better, more profitable business. So you got to make sure that you just don't get involved. And the intellectual property thing, use the Madrid system for trade secrets, for copyrights, for jingles, all of those kinds of things. And there are a lot of resources in the Madrid protocol websites that can help you with that. All right, so for jurisdiction, you're going to have to refer to a court's authority. Okay. If it's outside of your borders, you need to figure out, can your laws and so forth be enforced elsewhere? Now, with the United States, if you actually get involved in illegal activity in another country, you can still be prosecuted in the United States because they say all U.S. companies should not do these things. So if you do them, then you're going to be in trouble here. Okay. You need to check out to what extent the jurisdiction extends to the host country companies. Okay. If it can be demonstrated that the company is doing business in the state that the court sits, then that jurisdiction may have priority in that host country than your own laws as well. So in actuality, you are the people and the business in that other country not only has to comply with US law if you're a US business, you also have to comply with the laws elsewhere. Now, if you get into conflict with another company in that country, then in the contract, you should figure out, number one, and state in the contract the jurisdiction and make sure it is can be legally stated that way in that other country, which is where legal counsel comes in. And it's clear that both parties have agreed that in the case of conflict, we're going to handle it in this way. Okay. Okay. So conflict resolution. I could go on with this forever. Okay. Litigation only works in certain countries that have the common law practice. You may not be able to carry things out in the same way in civil law countries. Litigation is the most expensive, and litigation is actually very much tied to jurisdiction, okay? And which country says it has the right to hear the case, okay? If at all possible, avoiding litigation is very important. How do you make sure that you handle things in a way that conflicts are resolved amicably so that if desired, you can continue doing business? Now, arbitration has been around for a long time. Over 100 countries have been involved in the Treaty on international arbitration and how to handle it. In arbitration, we do not go to court. The parties agree via contract, usually when the contract is signed, that any conflicts will be handled by arbitration, okay? And that both parties or all parties involved, because it could be a three-way situation or a four-way situation, conflict, will abide by what the panel decides. Now, if you just do US arbitration, it's not usually a panel, it's an individual arbitrator that makes the binding decision. But in international, it's basically been done by panels of individuals, okay? And so in 1958, the United Nations did put together a convention on the recognition and enforcement of arbitrarial awards. And this was held in New York in that facility there. So, mediation. There is an organization that operates out of the United States called Mediators Beyond Borders International. And I actually am a member of it. I personally spent over 10 years as a mediator in the state of Iowa for debtor-creditor mediation. I have also been trained in public employment relations and mediation, and in divorce mediation, which actually divorce mediation and business mediation can be very similar, except for it seems that divorce mediation is much more volatile because of the emotions involved, okay? So in mediation, both parties agree to sit to mediation, or all parties, because some mediations involve more parties than just two. So a impartial mediator is chosen to hear the case. And the parties come to the table, and the mediator does not have any capability of making a decision that the parties have to comply with. The mediator guides the parties in their discussions to come up with their own resolution and agree to carry it out on their own. So the mediator does not say, okay, this is what you're going to do, unless it's a situation where, for example, you need more than one session to carry it. The mediator might say at the end, okay, so I want you guys to bring this information to the table next time, or need to gather more information so we can work together better. And so basically, especially in areas, for example, mediation has become very popular, even with the situation with strikes, where instead of having an arbitrator come down with a binding resolution or a court making a decision, the mediator works with the parties to come up with something that they both buy into. Mediation is a situation where we're trying to get them to want to work together in the long term and solve that conflict. So, this, as a mediator, I've seen a lot of things work really well, because when they make the decision, there's less hard feelings and emotions. They get through it and work through it. There's a lot of venting, okay, that goes with that. But it is a great way to resolve situations, okay? So when we looked at conflict resolution, there's these three main types. The United States has more lawyers than any other per capita than any other country in the world, and is definitely the most litigious nation on earth. So when we look at that and we look at the low context nature of the American culture, we want to get in there, get things done. We're very direct. Okay. This can be a problem. Okay. We're much more confrontational and much more competitive, if you will. But in other cultures, they're much more high context. This contributes to the aspect of being able to work things through mediation. They want to talk it through and discuss those things and make them work. In the United States, of course, we can hire attorneys on a contingent basis, which means that's part of why we have way more litigations. In other parts of the world, if someone wants to file a lawsuit, they have to pay their attorneys as time goes by when the work is done. And if they lose, they have to pay the legal fees of the other party. And so this restricts the number of lawsuits that you're going to see for different things, okay? So that makes a difference. And the United Nations, like I said, convention is very important. But signatories cannot enforce the award. They can only recommend things. And then the International Chamber of Commerce works with arbitration. The American Arbitration Association can provide names. And the Swedish Arbitration Institute or other places you can go to find qualified arbitrators to help resolve a case. So, as we conclude here, as in our short time period, I want to thank you. These are ways to contact me if you want to discuss some things further and go deeper than we had in this short time period. But definitely all businesses, when they start thinking about exporting, importing, or doing business abroad, this is stuff that you cannot just kind of just leave for later. You got to be upfront about it and plan for it, especially in the area of corruption. So thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you, Maurice, for working around my teaching schedule. We had global trade class this morning, so Anyway, we made it work.
Great. Thank you, Chris. We have some time for questions. If you have questions for Chris. Anybody? I might have a couple, but
Yes,
maybe.
Maurice, I've had my hand up. This is Queen Nina.
Hi,
Okay.
Queen Nina.
Hi, how are you?
Very good.
I just wanted to share something with you. Number one, thank you so much for that education. What I would like to share that's very important for everyone on this call. Um, Maurice knows that I am embarking on expanding my U.S. businesses to Africa. And so this bribe corruption has been very much a concern of mine because that is how most of the African governments work, is that you do give them bribes to get, to get work done. So I was wondering, like, wow, how am I going to do business in Africa? I go back and forth to Nigeria and Ghana. So I'm like, how am I going to do business? And we have this anti-corruption law in the US. Well, fast forward, I am on the newsletter for the US Department of State. And so I got an email recently in their newsletter that Trump has now paused the 1977 Anti-Corruption Act so American businesses can compete with other businesses like China and so forth. So it's on a 180-day hold right now, and they are talking about extending it for another 180 days. So it may be banned altogether. And I want people to be aware of that Trump wants us to be competitive. And so he's trying to abolish that anti-corruption law. That's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
And unfortunately, there are some things going on that I don't think are truly better for business. Because like I said, if you get into the game of bribery, it may cost you more in the long run than just doing business honestly.
But we have to look up keep up with the laws. If it's a United States law that there's no bribery, anti-corruption act anymore, then it's open game, basically.
Yeah. But that can change, as we know, in an instant right now. I mean, think about all of the things that were put into place and then 2 or 3 days later were changed back or modified. So yes, we need to keep track of it, but be aware that you could get yourself in the long run into a lot of trouble. But I respect you for I have been in Ghana many times and done business there, and I'm on a group that's looking at how to educate in climate change with Nigeria. And so yeah, it's an interesting place to do business. I will put it that way.
Absolutely. Thanks.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind. And first of all, thank you for all the valuable information. I know that some regions, actually, not only countries, that they have certain cultures. If we don't like go with the flow with their cultures, there'll be an issue, I believe. Like I know in some cultures, they will meet with you in a restaurant, fancy restaurant. And in these cultures, I know everybody will jump to pay. It's not like you sit down and wait for them to pay the bill. So you jump in as they do. If we paid this bill, is it something wrong? And in other situations that you have to carry something in your hand, like a gift, when you visit them, it's a must. Otherwise, it might be an insult that you walked in with empty hands. So based on these cultures, how can we act, behave? What shall we do?
Okay, gift giving in itself is not an infraction. It's only if it's given to gain something.
Okay.
Okay, so if you're sitting down, and yes, I know, I just came back from China again. I was there on a couple things for our university. And my gosh, you almost have to take a second suitcase because everybody wants to give you a small token. And it's very much a cultural thing. And so in those situations where it's just part of a routine type thing, you know, small gifts, I make, in fact, I can show you one here. So when I have guests or am doing things like I just hosted some president of a university in Thailand, I do something cultural, which is what a lot of the gifts are. Okay, this is a quilted thing that what's more Iowa than quilting, right? Okay. And so I exchange that and they give me something of their culture. That would not be a bribe. It's just part of the whole thing. And yes, gift giving is huge around the world. But if it's given with the idea that you are going to give me a contract or give me business, then and it's just a one-way thing, then that's a bribe.
Okay.
Okay. Does that
That's
help
clear.
clarify that?
Oh, definitely.
So
Thank
what is Marvisol?
Marvisol is a new brand for skincare products that is created based on old remedies from the Mediterranean region that we inherited from our grandmother, and they are made with botanical ingredients and natural essential oils.
Oh, cool. Sounds great.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Are there any other questions? Okay, thanks, Chris. It was very useful. I just want to say that from your point of view, the audience, why are we telling you all this stuff? Not just this session, but all the previous sessions and one more to come when I haven't even started exporting. We are recording all these things because at some point you hopefully will be exporting with our help. And at that point, you're going to need to know what these sessions have been telling you. So you'll have those recordings to always revert back to. And our job is to get you in a position where you're going to need to listen to those again. We have one more session of substance next week. And then the final session, as I said, is kind of open-ended. And we could spend 3.5 hours doing nothing, or I'm hoping that some of you or all of you will take the time to formulate questions that you have at this time, because we can field all those questions in that last session. And if you do, so we can manage the time well, if we see no one coming forward with questions, and what I'd like you to do is let us know in advance what questions you might have so that we can prepare for them. If we don't get any questions in advance, we have 3.5 hours to figure out how to spend. And so I'll wait another week to see whether I'm in the situation of having to fill time, or whether we'll be in a situation of addressing key issues of concern to you. It doesn't have to be a question, it could be a concern. What do I do about this? What happens in situations like that, or whatever? We're getting closer now to the point in the program where we've identified individual companies that categorize or fit into the either of the two tracks. There's the track of what we call Export 201, where the companies already have exported to some extent, but have other potentials in other markets. So they already, as Simona mentioned, know something about exporting. They've done it in a limited extent. And that group called 201, Export 201, will be working with Simona. And then my group would be those that we've identified as new to export, that have an exportable product or service, just haven't exported it yet. And that group will be, and there may be some 14 of them, I think, that might fit into that category. I've sent a message out saying, I think you fit. let me know for sure, and some have responded. And if I don't hear a response from the ones I sent that message to, I'll assume that you're not interested or going to be part of that group. That's very important to let me know if you want to be part of that new to export 101 group.
Maurice, I didn't receive any message from you, and I think I belong to this group.
You're
so-
already categorized as 201.
Yeah, okay.
And you will hear from Simona.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, that means we assume you've already done some exporting.
No, I didn't. Not even.
Oh,
So
you haven't exported to any country?
no, not yet. Not yet.
Oh, I
No.
thought when a previous conversation you had. Well, then
No.
you would fall into my group.
Okay. So, but I didn't receive any message from
I'll
you.
make a note of that and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I don't know, Perry, are you on the line? Perry Mayer? From AquaBlue? He's the other one that we've known from the previous time. I think he has done some exporting, so he would be in Simona's group. Okay, we've met our time limit. If there are no further questions, I hope to see you again next Wednesday with another 3.5 hours of why am I getting this information? Hope you understand. Okay,
Thank you.
see you next week.
Thank you.